My flashlight hit eyes, but they were 10 feet off the ground. I don't usually talk about my time working as a ranger out near Bridger Teton. Most folks assume park rangers are just tree huggers in green uniforms, giving directions to tourists and clearing trash. And yeah, sometimes that's true, but there are parts of the job that don't make it into the brochures. Stuff they don't warn you about during training. They don't tell you what it's like being 3 hours from the nearest paved road with no cell reception, alone in a wooden cabin that creaks even when there's no wind. They don't tell you what kind of people the woods attract. It started in late September, the start of the off-season. Tourists thinned out, the air got colder, and the quiet set in. That heavy, suffocating kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person left on Earth. That week, I was stationed solo at one of the backcountry posts near Grizzly Point, deep in the forest, miles from the main trailheads. My job was to patrol some of the lesser-used paths, monitor the wildlife cameras, and log any damage to the terrain from storms or, occasionally, idiots with jeeps. That's when I noticed something weird. It started with a hiker that never checked out. A young guy, maybe late 20s, clean-shaven, glasses, a Patagonia jacket. He'd signed the log for Cliffside Loop. That trail's about 7 miles round trip, steep and brutal in some parts, but manageable in daylight. Problem is, he never came back through. I noticed it when I was logging the daily sheets before sundown. Normally, this wouldn't be unusual. People camp overnight or take detours, but this guy had no gear, no tent, no pack, nothing but a day bottle and some Cliff Bars clipped to his belt. I radioed in, but the weather was bad that night. Heavy static. The tower was old as hell and barely functional when it rained. I figured I'd head up in the morning to look around. Next day, I hiked up Cliffside. Trees stand tighter up there, pines packed like teeth, and the ridge gets narrow fast. You can see out over the whole basin on a clear day. That morning, though, it was foggy, the kind that hangs low and clings to your ankles as you walk. About halfway up, I found a boot, not a pair. Just one, sitting in the mud near a bend in the trail. It was upright, not thrown or tumbled like someone had tripped. Laces still knotted tight. It looked placed. I didn't touch it. I kept walking. A few minutes later, I smelled something metallic. Not blood exactly, but close, like hot iron or pennies soaked in vinegar. I came across a torn-up patch of moss beside the trail, with streaks of reddish-brown dragged across the stone. Could have been an animal, but the pattern was all wrong. No paw prints, no claw marks, just a long smear that vanished into the trees. I called out a few times. Nothing. No birds, no wind, not even my own echo, just stillness. At the top of the loop, there's a bluff that looks out over the ravine. People love taking photos there. I approached the lookout, and that's when I saw it. A pile of clothes, folded neatly. The same jacket the hiker was wearing laid on top of the jeans, socks tucked into the boots like he'd just disappeared. No blood, no signs of a struggle, just gone. I backed away and radioed again. Nothing but static. I turned around to head back to the station, moving fast. I've done this job 10 years. I've seen cougar attacks, avalanche debris, even a body once that had been half-eaten by coyotes. But this felt wrong, like I was being watched. As I moved down the trail, I saw something that made my chest tighten. Footprints. Fresh ones. Not boot prints. Bare feet leading parallel to the trail, sometimes ducking off into the underbrush, then returning again. They were wide and flat, like adult feet, but the spacing was strange. Long strides, longer than I could manage even running. I made it back just as the light started to fade. Back in the station, I locked the door. Not something I normally do, but that night it felt necessary. There's a rifle in the back, old but loaded. I kept it next to me, even inside. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to tapping. Soft, methodical tapping. Not at the door, on the window. 3 taps, pause, then 3 more. The window's about 8 feet off the ground. There's no deck outside it. No ledge. I didn't look. I stayed still, pretending to sleep. Heart pounding so hard I thought it would give me away. After a few minutes, the tapping stopped. But I heard something shuffle just beyond the glass. A sound like wet feet sliding across wood. I didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, I checked the area outside. Nothing. No prints, no scuffs. But the dust on the sill had been disturbed, like someone had leaned against it, and in the middle of the dirt path, two indentations, long, deep, side by side, like someone had been standing there on stilts, or legs longer than any human should have. I didn't tell anyone. When I got back, I filed a missing person report, gave a cleaned up version of my story to the ranger lead, said the guy probably got disoriented and fell. Happens all the time. But I never went back to that station. And sometimes, even now, I dream about that tapping, the slow, patient rhythm, and those prints, the kind made by something walking barefoot, but way too tall. A week passed. I told myself I was fine, just shaken up. Stress does things to the brain, warps your sense of sound, makes you see shapes where there's nothing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something knew I had seen it, or that I had come too close to something I wasn't supposed to find. That next assignment didn't help. I got sent west, near the Snake River corridor. My new post was an older ranger station. Looked like it hadn't been cleaned out since the 90s. Rat droppings in the corners, logbooks stacked to the ceiling, a moldy American flag pinned to the wall. The station sat alone on a hill, with a direct line of sight down to the water. Beautiful, in that eerie, empty way, like a place too quiet to still be alive. My job was fire watch and trail recon. Pretty standard stuff. But on the second night, something weird happened. I was sitting on the porch around 11 p.m., just sipping instant coffee, when I noticed a flicker of orange through the trees. At first, I thought it was a campfire. But no one was cleared to hike that side of the valley this time of year. Elk migration routes were being monitored, and parts of the trail had washed out. So I grabbed my flashlight and hiked down. Took maybe 15 minutes to reach the tree line where I'd seen the glow. But when I got there wasn't a fire. There was a lantern. One of those old-school Coleman ones, propped on a broken stump, still burning. But here's the thing. It was dry. Bone dry. I picked it up and shook it. No slosh, no heat. But it had been lit. I panned the light around, and that's when I saw something that really messed me up. There were toys in the dirt, small ones. A plastic triceratops. A Hot Wheels car, scratched up. A stuffed rabbit, sun-faded and soaked with dew, all half buried in a ring around the stump, like a weird makeshift shrine. No footprints, no tire tracks, just toys and a dead lantern. I backed away and started heading up, fast. About halfway back to the station, I swear to God, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, flashed the light. Nothing. Silence. Not even a cricket. Then I heard breathing. Just a slow, low inhale. Then, nothing. When I got back, the station door was wide open. I hadn't left it that way. I stood there for a minute, shining my light through the doorway. All I could see were the outlines of my gear, the corner of the cot, and the metal kettle on the stove. Nothing seemed out of place, until I walked in and noticed the logbook on the desk had been flipped open. Page dated 1991, underlined in red. Saw the tall one again. I flipped through more pages, same handwriting, always in red ink, scattered across a few years. Notes like, tapping again, same time, same pattern. He leaves things in threes. Woke up with dirt on my sheets. Footprints at the base of the ladder. Don't look at his face. I'm not a paranoid guy. Never have been. I've done solo patrols in pitch dark with only a radio and a flashlight. I've hiked into wildfire zones with 20-pound packs and no backup. But reading those entries, something about how casual they were, how this other ranger had just accepted it, it made my skin crawl. And then I saw the name on the last entry, Ranger D. Halverson. I remembered the name. Sort of a legend around that region. Old-timer, supposedly went off the grid in the early 2000s. Story was he got sick of the bureaucracy and walked out into the woods. Never came back. Some folks said he'd retired to Montana. Others whispered he'd lost it and wandered off. No one knew for sure. But now I was sitting in his station, reading his journal, seeing the same things he saw. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't even lie down. I sat in a chair facing the door, rifle across my lap, flashlight in my left hand. The quiet was worse than any scream. Then around 3 a.m., I heard it again. 3 slow, hollow taps on the window behind me. Same rhythm. I turned around slowly, light shaking in my hand. I raised it to the window and froze. Eyes, just two of them, round, glassy, reflecting the beam of my flashlight, but they were way too high up, higher than the window frame, which sat maybe 9 feet off the ground. And they didn't blink. They just watched, silent, steady, unblinking. I stared back, paralyzed. My fingers hovered near the trigger, but I didn't move. Something deep in my gut told me not to shoot, not to scream, not to react. Then the eyes disappeared. No movement, no sound, just gone. I bolted the door, stayed awake until daylight. The next morning, I packed my gear and hiked out. Didn't ask for permission, didn't log it in the tracker. I just left. A few days later, I got a call from my supervisor. He was pissed, asked where the hell I'd been, said I abandoned post, violated policy. I didn't argue. I just told him something's wrong out there. He went quiet. Then he said something I haven't stopped thinking about since. You saw the tall one, didn't you? He didn't laugh. He didn't explain. Just ended the call. That was my last week in the service. I quit, moved to the city, got a job with a delivery company, far from the forests, far from the quiet. But some nights, especially when it's foggy, I'll catch myself standing by the window, flashlight in hand, heart pounding, watching for the reflection of eyes that shouldn't be that high off the ground. After I left the Ranger service, I thought it would stop. The dreams, the noises, the feeling of being followed. I told myself it was just trauma, sleep deprivation, isolation. I told myself I needed time. But the thing is, some things follow you. At first, it was just little stuff. A scratch at the window. Not a knock, a scratch. Like fingernails dragging across the glass. Just once. And then silence. Always around the same time. Between 2 and 3 a.m. My apartment's on the 3rd floor of a building in Boise. There's no way someone could have reached that window. No fire escape. No ledge. Nothing but 30 feet of brick wall. One morning, I woke up and there was dirt on my windowsill. Dry, reddish dirt. The kind you only find out in the backcountry trails, where the clay runs thick and iron-rich. I moved to another apartment. A couple weeks later, I found a toy on my doormat. A tiny, beat-up plastic horse, the kind you'd find in a Happy Meal from the 90s. I picked it up and just froze because it had the number 3 carved into its side. Not painted, scratched in. 3 uneven grooves. Rough, deliberate. I threw it away. That night, I had a dream. I was back at the station, the same one from Snake River. In the dream, everything was quiet except for this soft, dripping sound coming from the corner of the room. When I turned, I saw the wall was leaking blood. Not pouring, leaking. Slow, rhythmic droplets falling into a metal basin on the floor. Then the tapping started. 3 taps. Then 3 more. And when I turned to the window, it wasn't glass anymore. It was a mirror. But my reflection was missing. I woke up covered in sweat, heart racing, the name Halverson echoing in my head. So I did something I told myself I wouldn't do. I looked him up. Took some digging, but I found a forum. An old wilderness search and rescue board that hadn't been updated in years. Mostly missing hiker bulletins, outdated ranger reports, blurry trail maps. But buried in the archives, there was a thread titled Disappearance of R. Halverson, last reported sighting 2003. There wasn't much official detail, just that he was last seen hiking out of his own post, alone. His truck was found at the base of the trail, keys in the ignition, radio still crackling, but there was a reply from someone anonymous. No profile, no username, just one comment posted years later. He didn't leave. He walked toward it. He wanted to understand it. Underneath that, another post. Same user. He's not the only one it took. Look into the Bridger files, July 1987. Look for the words Faceless Ridge. You'll know when you find it. Faceless Ridge. I remembered hearing that name once in passing. A steep section off-trail, technically outside the main patrol grid, unmapped. Rangers avoided it because of loose shale and unstable cliffs. Locals called it cursed. Not officially, of course, but everyone knew. I couldn't let it go. So I drove back. Told myself I just needed to see it with my own eyes. For closure. I didn't contact the Park Service. Didn't want my name showing up on any logs. I entered through an old fire trail near a closed-off access road. Still had my old ranger badge. It let me bluff my way past a seasonal checkpoint when I said I was doing personal research for a book. The hike in took 6 hours. Faceless Ridge is real. The name doesn't show up on maps, but when you ask older locals, they'll go quiet. One guy at a gas station near Alpine, Wyoming, just shook his head and said, "You shouldn't go looking for things that don't want to be found." The deeper I went, the more wrong everything felt. Birds wouldn't chirp. Wind wouldn't blow. The trees grew too close together. Branches gnarled like fingers, trunks slanting in unnatural directions. I saw deer prints, but they ran in circles, like the animal had panicked and couldn't figure out which way to flee. By dusk, I found what I think used to be a camp. A few rusted tent poles, a crushed mellow yellow can from the early 2000s, a melted pair of sunglasses buried in the mud. Then I found the notebook, water damaged, crusted with pine needles. The first few pages were ruined, but deeper in were entries, dozens of them, handwritten. Some just lines repeated over and over. "He watches from the ridge. You're never alone up here. 3 taps, then 3 questions. Don't answer. Don't look. Don't run." And then one final entry, barely legible. I saw his eyes, but he didn't have a face. Just a stretch of skin, blank, smooth, like something pretending to be a man, but tall, way too tall. My flashlight flickered, and then I heard it. The same breathing I heard back at Snake River. Close now, right behind me. Slow, wet, deep. I spun around, beam shaking. It caught on something between the trees. 2 eyes. But this time, they weren't reflecting the light. They were absorbing it. So black it felt like falling into them. They were high off the ground, easily 10 feet, but there was no body, just eyes. And the suggestion of something massive behind the trees, a silhouette that didn't move, didn't twitch. I turned and ran. Branches cut my arms. Mud nearly pulled my boots off. I didn't stop until I hit the base of the ridge and collapsed behind a boulder. I could still hear it moving behind me. Not walking, gliding, like it didn't touch the ground. I didn't sleep that night. At first light, I limped out of there and never looked back. That was 3 months ago. Since then, things have only gotten worse. Sometimes I wake up with pine needles in my bed. Sometimes I dream of tapping and wake up to find my window open. Sometimes I walk past a mirror and don't see my reflection, just trees. And once, just once, I saw eyes. Not outside, behind me. I haven't been the same since I came back from Faceless Ridge. You don't just go into a place like that and leave untouched. It's not something you shrug off like a bad dream, a weird story you tell over beers. It stays with you like dirt under your fingernails you can't quite scrub out, like the smell of something rotting in the walls. You can't see it, but you know it's there. I started hearing things in the daytime. At first, I thought it was just PTSD, maybe auditory hallucinations. Stress does that to people, right? I had just gone through something no rational person could explain. I tried to be logical about it, ground myself. But how do you stay grounded when you're sitting in your apartment, 3 floors up, no one around, and you hear someone walking across your ceiling? Not footsteps, pacing. Slow, heavy pacing, like someone tall was moving back and forth just above my room. The weird part? There is no upstairs. I'm on the top floor. I tried to explain it to a friend, someone I used to serve with on the trail crew. He was the only person I trusted to even bring this up with. We met for coffee at a strip mall Starbucks in Boise, late afternoon, when I knew I'd feel safe surrounded by noise and people. I told him the basics. Left the service, saw something in the woods, can't sleep. I left out the details about the tapping and the eyes. I didn't want him thinking I'd gone completely off the rails. But he didn't laugh, didn't crack a joke. He just went real quiet, stirred his coffee for a long time. Then he said, "Did it leave anything?" "What?" He glanced around, lowered his voice. "A gift, like objects, small, random, things that don't belong." I swallowed hard. "Yeah." "Then it picked you." I asked him what the hell that meant, but he didn't explain. Just stood up, tossed his half-full drink in the trash, and left. I haven't heard from him since. He blocked my number the next day. That's when I really started to spiral. More gifts started appearing. A broken compass on my car seat. A dead crow on my welcome mat. A slice of raw meat, still pink, no packaging, resting perfectly in the center of my kitchen counter. One night, when I came home, no sign of entry, door locked, windows sealed, but it was there. One night, I finally snapped and did something stupid. I drove out to a local trailhead near the edge of Payette National Forest. Nothing major, just a short hiking loop that curved around a lake and back. It wasn't where I'd seen the thing, that was hours away, but I needed to feel the dirt again. Smell the pines. Try to remind myself I was still human, still in control. I brought a flashlight, a decent one of those tactical mag lights that double as a blunt weapon. I didn't make it far. About a mile in, the air changed. You probably don't know what that means unless you've spent real time in the woods. It's subtle. The temperature drops a few degrees. The wind vanishes. No birds, no bugs, just stillness, like something's holding its breath. That's when I saw the marks, 3 vertical slashes carved into a tree trunk about 6 feet high. Each one deep, clean, deliberate. Not bear marks, not claw marks. They looked etched, like with a blade. But who carries a machete into a family-friendly hiking loop? They weren't there the last time I came. I know because I always touch that tree. It's twisted in this weird spiral from a lightning strike, and I used to run my fingers over the scar when I passed. Now it had new ones, and then the tapping started again, but not on glass this time, on wood, from up in the trees. Tap, tap, tap. Silence. Then again. I aimed the flashlight up and I swear for a second I saw something crouched in the upper branches. Way too high, maybe 15 feet up. Its legs were bent backward like a deer's, arms too long, elbows cocked up above its head. And it was smiling. No face, just the shape of a face. Skin pulled tight where features should have been. But the mouth was there, and it was smiling. The flashlight flickered. I dropped it and ran. I don't remember getting back to the car. Not really. I remember dry heaving in the gravel parking lot, bloody palms from where I'd fallen on rocks. I don't remember driving home. That was the last time I went into the woods. But the woods didn't stay out of me. Last week I found my bedroom door open in the morning. I always lock it before bed. Always. I live alone. There was a pine cone sitting on my pillow. Small, closed, sappy. Wrapped in a piece of paper torn from a ranger's field notebook. On it were 3 words in faded red ink. You looked again? I burned it. Doesn't matter. That night, I had the worst dream yet. I was standing in the middle of the forest, naked, mud up to my knees. All around me were children's toys, half buried. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then I heard a voice, not loud, just a whisper right next to my ear. The woods don't forget. And then, tapping, on my spine. 3 taps, cold, like fingernails on bone. I woke up screaming. There were bruises on my back, 3 perfect circles. You know how when something's been eating at you long enough, you reach this point where fear doesn't even matter anymore? That's where I was. I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating right. My skin felt like it didn't fit anymore. Every night, I triple locked my door. And every morning, I woke up to something off, a misplaced object. My boots turned around facing the wall, a smear of mud across the floor when I hadn't left the apartment. The final straw was when I found hair in my sink drain. Long, coarse, black hair. I'm white, balding. Haven't had hair that long since college. And I don't let anyone in my place. So, yeah, I cracked again. But this time, I didn't go running back into the woods. This time, I started digging. Not online, not Reddit threads or ghost hunter forums. No more tinfoil hat YouTube videos. I needed real records, paper trails, government stuff. I started with the national parks, public archives. But that only gave me surface-level fluff. Tourist brochures, wildlife conservation plans, hiking permits. Then I found a name, Ranger Specialist Daniel Keller. He was a high-clearance search and rescue logistics manager. Quiet guy, no interviews, no public photos. But I found a conference transcript from 1999 where he mentioned something called the IRP system, Internal Ranger Protocol. He slipped up, said it was used for non-disclosure SAR reports. The crowd moved on. But I didn't. I started making calls. Most rangers stonewalled me. Others hung up the second I said Faceless Ridge. One guy from Colorado did talk, briefly. Whatever's out there, he whispered, has its own territory. Unofficial zones. The ones we pretend don't exist. They're on the maps, but only we can read them. Don't go looking. That's how you get on the list. What list? Click. I was getting nowhere until I got an email. No subject line, no return address, just a PDF attachment titled Cold SAR Filed Zone 1987 to 2009 PDF. Inside were 93 names. Each file followed the same pattern. Search and rescue report, closed, unresolved. Bridger Teton National Forest, NV Zone. Off-grid trails. Notes, weather clear, no signs of animal activity, no remains recovered. Witnesses describe tapping, tall silhouette, unusual objects. Remarks, incident flagged for IRP, no follow-up permitted. Some names I recognized, local disappearances that had turned into folklore. A trail runner who went missing during a 5K charity race and was never found. A teenage girl who vanished while geocaching with friends. An entire Boy Scout troop that got turned around in the fog and was never heard from again. And every single case had 3 numbers in the corner of the page. 3, 3, 3. One of the most recent entries was dated just 2 months before I saw the eyes. That's when I realized something that made my blood go cold. The thing I saw, the tall one, it wasn't random. It chooses you. Not everyone sees it. Not everyone can. It's like a locked door in your brain gets opened once you step into the wrong part of the forest, or once you notice it, even by accident. And once it picks you, it watches, leaves you things, whispers at night, maybe forever. I went back to the journal I took from the old ranger station, Halverson's journal. There were details I missed, phrases I skimmed before, too scared to process. I started looking closer. I tried to warn her. She thought it was just dreams. She answered the third question. Now I can't find her. It mimics noise, laughter, her voice. Don't follow it. If you hear the third knock, run. But then I saw this entry. Half torn, barely legible. They always disappear near water. That stopped me cold, because the night I saw it crouched in the trees, there was a creek just downhill from me. Barely a trickle, but it was there. And now that I was thinking about it, every single one of the cold SAR files mentioned proximity to water. Rivers, springs, even man-made lakes. So I dug deeper into the disappearances. I mapped them, overlaid every incident with a topo map of the park boundaries and water sources. And there it was, a pattern. Every 3 years, exactly 3, a cluster of missing persons reports would pop up along a wide arc of forest terrain. Always within a mile of water. Always within what the file called NV Zone. The curve of the disappearances formed a rough crescent, as if it were encircling something, a center point. The math put the epicenter smack in the middle of nowhere, a patch of land known locally, unofficially, as Dead Man's Hollow. I had never heard that name in any public report. No signage, no trails. It doesn't show up in the Forest Service database, at least not under that name. But the crescent led there. Every path, every case, every road pointed to it. I had to see it. So yeah, I went back. Stupid, maybe. But I couldn't live with the not knowing. I drove out after dark, parked on the side of a logging road, and hiked in with nothing but a headlamp, a knife, a bottle of water, and Halverson's journal. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. The deeper I went, the harder it was to breathe. I don't mean figuratively. I mean my lungs physically struggled. The air was thick, wet, like breathing through a sponge. The trees got taller. Too tall. Wrong tall. Their trunks seemed to sway even though there was no wind. Then I heard it. Not tapping this time. Laughter. My laughter, I froze. It came again just beyond the ridge. My voice, chuckling like I just told a joke, but stretched out, slurred like a puppet trying to remember how humans speak. Then it called my name. Hey, come here. It's okay. I turned off the headlamp, crouched low, waited. That's when I saw it. Something massive moved between the trees. Limbs too long, neck angled wrong. It ducked under a branch. Its movement was smooth but too fluid, like it wasn't made of joints and muscles, just fabric stretched over wire. And on its head, where a face should be, was just skin. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. But it was smiling anyway. I didn't run, not right away, because then it did something that still keeps me up at night. It pulled something from behind its back and dropped it on the ground. A ranger badge. Mine. The one I lost years ago in a rainstorm somewhere off trail. It knew who I was. and it had been watching longer than I realized. When it dropped my ranger badge onto the forest floor, I didn't move. I couldn't. Something about seeing that little square of metal, rusted and bent just like I remembered, sitting in the moss, placed there like a trophy, it broke something in me. My knees locked. My mouth went dry. It was proof, solid and impossible. Proof that the thing had followed me for years, that it wanted me to come back, that it had planned this. The tall figure stood just beyond the tree line, watching, waiting. The forest around it didn't move, not the leaves, not the air, not even the crickets. It was like the world had hit pause. And then it did the one thing I hoped it wouldn't. It tapped once on the tree beside it. Then again. Then a third time. 3 taps. Then came the voice. But it wasn't mine this time. It was Halverson's. I didn't know it for sure, but somehow in the marrow of my bones, I knew it was him. Do you know why you were chosen? The first question. It echoed like it came from inside my skull. I didn't answer. The creature tilted its head slowly, as if listening for something. It almost looked curious. Would you rather forget? The second question. The moss beneath me felt warm, suddenly wet, like it was pulsing with heat. Then came the third, the one Halverson warned about. The one every journal, every missing person case seemed to orbit. Will you stay? I don't remember deciding to speak. I didn't think. It just came out. I said, no. The forest screamed. There's no other word for it. It wasn't noise. It wasn't wind. It was like every tree, every root, every living thing around me cried out at once, in rage or hunger or disappointment. The figure moved fast. 1 second it was 20 feet away. The next, it was inches in front of me. It didn't run. It folded toward me like a collapsing shadow. Its height meant nothing. Its limbs bent in ways I don't want to describe. Skin stretched tight and dry over something inhuman underneath. I looked up into its face. There were no features, no mouth, but I felt it smile. And then it leaned in impossibly close and whispered, not out loud. Inside my mind, you were supposed to say yes. Then everything went black. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital in Jackson. A hiker found me face down in the mud, just off a disused ATV trail 10 miles from Dead Man's Hollow. Dehydrated, frostbite setting into my fingers, clothes torn, covered in bruises. I should have been dead. The doctor said I kept mumbling in my sleep, just one word over and over again. No, no, no. They thought I'd had a psychotic break. PTSD, exposure-induced hallucinations. All I told them was I got lost. Nothing more. I was released after 4 days. But I wasn't the same. I can't look at trees without feeling watched. I keep finding things in threes. Stones, sticks, scratch marks. Always in threes. I got a new phone. It rings every night at 3:33 a.m. No number, just static. I stopped answering. One night, I finally checked my voicemail. There were 3 messages, all blank. Except the last one. It was my voice. Will you stay? It never left the woods. It brought the woods with it. Everywhere I go, I feel it pacing behind me, in reflections, in glass, in the edges of sleep. Every time I blink, I wonder if I'll open my eyes and see those 10-foot-tall eyes staring back. I've moved 5 times, changed jobs. I sleep with a light on, always. Sometimes I catch myself reaching for a badge I haven't worn in years. And sometimes late at night, I hear tapping. Not on the door, not on the window, inside the walls. 3 times. Then silence. I never answer the third question. Not again. Because I know what happens when you say yes. You don't disappear. You become part of the woods. And then you start tapping. Can you tell me what time you are listening to this video? How do you feel about my video? If you like, please like and subscribe, and comment to let me know. That is a great motivation for me. Thank you guys. There's something in the trees that can mimic voices. I've worked for the Forest Service for almost 11 years, mostly stationed out west, Montana, Oregon, Wyoming, places where you can walk for a day and not see a single person. That's how I liked it. The silence, the distance from everything, even from my own damn thoughts. But 3 years ago, I took a seasonal post in the Smoky Mountains. Not my usual turf, but it paid well, came with a cabin, and I figured a few months out east wouldn't kill me. That's where everything changed. The area I was patrolling was part of a remote trail system near Klingman's Dome. but miles off the popular routes. My job was basic: keep tabs on trail markers, clear debris, report any signs of trespassing or fire hazards. Most of the time, I was walking through thick trees, listening to the wind and birds, making mental notes of fallen branches or snapped signs. But from the first week, something felt off. I started hearing voices where there shouldn't be any. Not talking exactly, more like calling, like someone yelling my name from deep in the woods, even when I was completely alone. The first time it happened, I thought it was a prank. Maybe some kid hiding out there with a speaker or a friend on a walkie. I shouted back, "Who's out there?" Nothing. The trees just swayed, creaking slightly. The birds kept chirping. 2 days later, I heard it again. This time it was my boss's voice. "Jason?" she yelled, clear as day. But when I radioed her, she said she hadn't left the main station all afternoon, and she sounded normal, not like she'd just called out to me from a canyon. I tried laughing it off. Guess the forest is playing tricks on me. But the more it happened, the less funny it felt. The voices started to mimic other people. Hikers I'd helped find their way, co-workers, even an old girlfriend from college, her voice specifically, yelling my name in that panicked way I hadn't heard since we'd gotten stuck in a storm outside Yellowstone years back. There were no signs of other people, no footprints, no camping gear, no wrappers or fires or tracks. Just that voice, always one I knew, calling from somewhere just out of sight. I finally told my coworker Travis, who laughed it off like it was some bear mating call or wind through the rocks. But he agreed to hike out with me one morning just to prove I wasn't hearing things. We got about 8 miles deep before I heard it again. Only this time, Travis heard it too. We froze. The voice echoed from behind a ridge, maybe 200 feet up the slope. It was his voice. I mean that literally. Travis's exact voice, his tone, his cadence, yelling, "Jason, over here!" But Travis was standing next to me, not moving, not even breathing for a second. We looked at each other. He whispered, "That's not me." Then we both ran. Not smart, I know, but the fear hit us like a cold wave. We ran until our legs gave out, collapsed behind a fallen tree, panting so hard it felt like my ribs would crack. We didn't talk about it on the hike back. He just kept looking over his shoulder. Me too. Travis quit the next week. No warning, no goodbye. Just cleaned out his locker and left. His girlfriend said he started having night terrors. Stopped talking entirely some nights, would just stand in the backyard, staring into the woods behind their house. I stayed. I shouldn't have, because things got worse after he left. They didn't just mimic voices anymore. They started knocking. The knocking started about a week after Travis left. It was subtle at first, like branches tapping a window, except my cabin didn't have any trees close enough for that. And the knocking wasn't on the window. It was on the door. Light, measured, 3 sharp taps around 2:13 a.m. every night. The first night, I thought maybe it was a raccoon or a drunk hiker who wandered too far off trail. I grabbed my flashlight and opened the door. Nothing, just thick fog sitting low in the pines, and the air so still it made my ears ring. No footprints, no rustling, just the dark and that kind of silence that feels way too loud. The next few nights it kept happening. Same time, same pattern. One night, I yelled, "Who's out there?" And for the first time in my life, I felt like the forest was listening. Because a moment later, from the edge of the tree line came a voice. Not just any voice, it was Travis. "Jason, open up." But it was wrong. I don't know how to explain it. Like the syllables were stitched together a little too spaced out. Like whoever, whatever, was saying them hadn't practiced human speech enough yet. It just stood out there, not moving. I could hear the voice again, low this time, almost pleading. "Jason, I need your help." I should have called someone, the park supervisor, hell, even local authorities. But I didn't. I just shut the door, locked every bolt, turned off the lights, and waited with my back against the wall, holding a kitchen knife. That night, I didn't sleep. The next morning, I followed the trail down to the spot where I thought the voice had come from. I found something. Not a person. Not a body. Just a patch of moss that had been peeled back from the forest floor like someone had carefully scraped it off with a blade. Underneath, the dirt had been dug out. Just a small pit, maybe a foot deep, but something had been buried there. A boot, a single, rotting, mud-covered boot. I pulled it out and turned it over. It was a Timberland, size 11. I recognized it instantly. It belonged to a kid named Alex Whitaker, a hiker who went missing last summer on the very trail I was patrolling. Search and rescue found nothing. Just his abandoned pack near a dead pine and his torn trail map soaked in rain. He wasn't even listed as deceased. Just another open missing persons case, stacked up in park records like forgotten ghosts. But now I had his boot, half buried like some twisted offering. I reported it, of course. Told my boss I found it during routine trail maintenance. She logged it. No questions, no follow-up. The next night, the knocking came again. But this time, it wasn't just 3 knocks, it was 6. And they came from the back door. I don't have a back door. I froze. There's no entrance on the rear side of my cabin. Just solid wood wall and the storage shed. I checked it 100 times. It's where I keep my gear, my axe, backup lanterns. No door, no window. Just trees behind me for 100 yards. But the sound was unmistakable. Fist on wood. Knock, knock, knock. I sat there at the small kitchen table, the light off, holding my breath. And then, God, I wish I imagined this. I heard whispering behind the wall, like someone was leaning against it from outside, whispering through the grain. It was my voice. I'm inside. I didn't open the door. I didn't move at all. I stayed still until the sun crept through the window blinds and the sound finally stopped. In the morning, I walked out to the back wall. There were scratches on the wood, deep ones, not claw marks, fingernails, 10 long gouges running down like someone had dragged both hands down the wall trying to find a way in. They were still fresh, tiny bits of nail still stuck in the grooves. I checked the shed, thinking maybe someone had broken in, but everything was untouched, except the axe. It was missing. I should have left right then. I knew that, but something kept me there. Curiosity, stupidity, guilt, whatever it was. I told myself I'd finish the week, just one more patrol loop. The next morning, I hiked the South Ridge Trail. Remote, steep, rarely used by the public. That's where I found it. A pile of clothes, folded perfectly, sitting in the middle of the path. Shirt, jeans, socks, all damp, stained with soil like they'd been worn for days, then taken off in silence. On top of the pile, carefully balanced, was the missing axe. There was a sticky smear of something dark on the blade. Not fresh, but not old either. It smelled sharp, metallic. The tag on the shirt collar read, Whitaker. My legs gave out a little. I crouched there, hands on knees, breathing through my mouth. And then from the trees behind me, I heard something move. Not an animal, not branches. Footsteps. Coming toward me. Slow. Deliberate. Crunch, crunch, crunch. And then a voice, hoarse, breathless, right behind my ear. Don't look. I didn't. I just ran. I didn't stop running until I was halfway down the ridge, lungs heaving, thighs screaming. I slipped once on loose gravel, slammed my elbow into a rock, but I didn't care. I just needed to put as much distance between myself and that voice as possible. That thing pretending to be me. When I got back to the station, I made up some excuse about a twisted ankle and said I needed a day or two to rest. My supervisor didn't question it. I think she was just relieved someone was still covering that area, since most rangers didn't last more than a season out there. But I wasn't sleeping. I wasn't eating. Every shadow outside my cabin window felt like it was watching me. I started hearing the voice during the day. At first, I thought it was echoing through the trees. Just tricks of the wind, maybe? But then I started hearing it closer. Humming in the cabin's walls, whispering from the stove vent. One afternoon, I was brushing my teeth, and I swear to God, I heard it humming from the drain in my bathroom sink. It was singing some old lullaby I couldn't place. Out of tune, slow, like whoever was humming didn't understand the melody, but was trying to copy it anyway. I punched the mirror that day, glass everywhere. Didn't care. I just needed proof I wasn't going insane. So I did something stupid. I set up a trap. That next night, I left my door unlocked, just barely, and I sat in the corner of the room, flashlight in one hand, my old hiking knife in the other. I didn't blink for an hour, just stared at the door and waited. And right on time, 2:13 a.m., came the knock. Just once. Not three. Not six. One single thud against the door. Then silence. Then the doorknob turned, slowly, like whoever was outside wasn't sure how doors even worked. And then it opened a few inches, just enough to show me the empty doorway. Nothing stood there. No wind, no animal. But it was cold, like walking into a freezer. My breath fogged instantly. And then I saw it. Something stepped into the cabin, but it wasn't visible. Not fully. The only way I knew it was there was from the reflection in the glass on the oven door. Something tall, thin, moving in jagged motions, like it wasn't used to having joints, like it was wearing a human shape but didn't quite know how to move inside it. Its head was tilted at a weird angle, like a puppet with slack strings. And in the reflection, it smiled. I didn't even scream. I just ran out the back, through the storage shed, into the woods, barefoot, in boxers, holding nothing but my flashlight. I slept in my truck that night, didn't go back to the cabin until noon the next day. When I finally opened the door, nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. But everything smelled wrong, like damp earth and rust. And on the kitchen table, written in ash and small stones, was a message, "I'm learning." That afternoon, I drove into town. I booked a cheap motel, old place, faded signage, sheets that smelled like burnt coffee, and stayed there for 2 nights, trying to convince myself it had been a hallucination. Maybe I'd been out in the woods too long. Maybe the silence was getting to me. But the second night, around 2 a.m., someone knocked on the motel room door. 2 knocks, then a pause, then 2 more knocks. I sat up in bed, sweating. A minute later, I got a text from an unknown number. It just said, "Jason, I found you." No app, no trace. Just those words. I turned off my phone and threw it into the toilet. Next morning, I packed everything, told the station I was done. I didn't care if it meant breaking contract. I'd take the penalty. I just wanted to disappear. But when I drove up to the ranger station to hand in my keys, something strange happened. There was a man waiting for me, wearing a ranger uniform, but one I didn't recognize. Old style. The kind with the wide hat and faded patch, like something from the 70s. He looked out of place, too clean, too still. And he smiled when I walked up. "You must be Jason," he said. "Yeah," I muttered. "Just dropping off my stuff. I'm done." "You sure?" he asked. His voice was deep, calm, almost friendly. But there was something in his eyes, too shiny, too focused. "I'm sure." He nodded, then said, "You know, you never should have followed the voice." I froze. What did you say? But he was already walking away, whistling that same lullaby I'd heard in my sink. I never saw him again. And when I asked the others at the station who he was, they just stared at me. "There's no one new here," one said. "Nobody like that on staff." I never got back in my truck so fast. I drove west. Didn't stop for hours. That was 5 months ago. I've moved twice since then. But just last night, I got another knock on my apartment door. 2 knocks. Pause. 2 more. There are no trees here. I live on the 3rd floor. I stood there, frozen, staring at the front door of my apartment like it was a loaded gun pointed at my chest. 2 knocks. Pause. 2 more. That same unnatural rhythm. The same pattern that followed me from the woods now repeating itself in a city apartment building, where the only thing outside was a flickering hallway light and a staircase that reeked of cigarette smoke and takeout grease. I didn't move, didn't speak. I just backed into the kitchen, grabbed the drawer handle, and pulled out the same hiking knife I'd brought from the cabin. My hand was shaking. I told myself it was probably a neighbor, maybe someone knocking on the wrong door. It happens. People get drunk. Deliveries go to the wrong unit. That's normal, right? But deep down, I knew. I waited a solid 5 minutes before I inched toward the peephole. My breathing was shallow, like I was trying not to alert whatever was on the other side. When I finally looked through the glass, nothing, just the empty hallway. Carpet, peeling paint, fluorescent hum, no shadow, no person walking away, not even footsteps fading in the distance. But there was something written on the wall across from my door, carved in with something sharp. "I'm learning." The scratches were deep, fresh. I called the landlord. He came up, took one look at the wall, and frowned. "Jesus, did you do this?" he asked. I shook my head, too stunned to lie. No, someone knocked. I opened the door, and it was already there. He narrowed his eyes. You didn't open the door. I was downstairs 5 minutes ago. No one came in. And you're the only tenant on this floor. I didn't answer. He didn't press me. Just shook his head, muttered something about repainting, and left. That night, I shoved a chair under the doorknob and slept with the knife under my pillow. At 2:13 a.m. on the dot, I woke up, not to a sound, not to a knock, but to my own voice whispering from inside the closet. Jason. I couldn't breathe. I just stared at the closet door, slowly rising to sit. The knife was in my hand before I even realized I was gripping it. Another whisper. You left me. It was the same intonation, the same voice I use when I'm half asleep, the same rhythm I'd heard in my own nightmares since that night in the woods. And then the closet clicked. The door creaked open an inch. Darkness behind it. I stood inching closer with the knife raised, heart pounding in my throat. My feet moved like they weren't mine, like I was being dared to open it. So I did. The closet was empty. No coats, no boxes, no shadow in the corner, just a scrap of something taped to the back wall. It was a piece of paper. Old, weather-worn, with one sentence printed in block letters. Mimics can only follow what they see. I stared at it, trying to make sense of what it meant. Was it a warning? A clue? A message from someone else who dealt with this thing? And then I saw the second sentence. It had been added in pen, shaky and faint. It watched you run. That was it. I packed my bags that night. I didn't care where I ended up. I just needed out. I booked an Airbnb 6 hours away, middle of nowhere, desert town. No trees, no forests, no shadows. When I arrived, it was quiet. Bleached sky, dry heat. The air smelled like sun-baked metal and sand. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No phone, no texts, no posts, no trail. The second night there, I was sitting on the patio drinking a beer, trying to convince myself I was finally safe. That's when the wind died completely. The crickets stopped, and behind me, from inside the house, I heard a voice. My own voice. Found you. I dropped the bottle. Shattered glass, foam on the concrete. I ran back inside. Every door was locked, every window sealed. But there, on the hallway wall above the bed, scratched deep into the drywall, was a message. You brought me with you. That night, I had a dream. At least I think it was a dream. I was back in the woods, standing beneath those tall skeletal trees, and I could hear my name echoing from every direction. But they weren't calling to me. They were calling from me. Dozens of voices, all mine, all wrong. I looked down at my hands, and they weren't my hands anymore. They were long, stretchy, too many joints. And in the trees ahead of me, I could see something standing tall, still. A mirror made of bark. And it smiled. When I woke up, my skin hurt. Not in a bruised way, more like something had been crawling under it, tugging at it from the inside. I looked in the mirror, and for half a second, my reflection didn't move when I did. It just stood there, smiling. I left the desert the next day. Didn't even wait for sunrise. Didn't pack. Didn't check out. Just threw some clothes in the back seat and peeled off down that empty highway, engine whining as the Airbnb shrank in my rearview mirror. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept checking the mirrors, expecting to see something sitting in the back seat. Some twisted version of myself, grinning that crooked grin. The desert didn't help. It made the world feel endless. Just 2 lines of cracked asphalt and a wide, silent nothing. No trees, no shadows, no place to hide. And yet the feeling didn't go away. That cold, invisible pressure, like someone breathing against the back of my neck. Every gas station I stopped at, I caught people staring. Clerks, strangers. A kid by the vending machine turned to his mom and said, "That man's not real." I kept moving. Eventually, I ended up in a town so small it didn't even have a real name. Just a number on a mile marker and a faded sign that read, "Welcome." No shops, no lights. Just a truck stop and a single diner that smelled like old coffee and cigarette ash. I went in, ordered black coffee, and sat in the back booth. I was alone. No music, no chatter. Just the tick of the ceiling fan and the hiss of a grill somewhere behind the counter. I hadn't been sitting 5 minutes when a man slid into the booth across from me. Didn't ask, didn't introduce himself. Just sat down, arms folded. He was older, maybe late 60s, with deep lines on his face and pale blue eyes that didn't blink much. "You're being followed," he said. I didn't answer right away. Just stared at him, heart thumping against my ribs like it wanted out. He leaned in. "You think you're the first? You're not. You're just the latest." I swallowed. "What is it?" He didn't speak for a moment, just looked down at the table like the answer hurt to say out loud. "They used to call it an echo," he finally said. "Now I don't know what the hell it is. Something that watches, waits, pretends." I kept my voice low. "Why me?" He raised an eyebrow. "You ran, didn't you? When it first called your name." I nodded. "That's how it starts," he said. "That moment of fear, that's all it needs. It doesn't follow you exactly. It follows the version of you that broke, the part that ran." "I didn't know," I muttered. "No one does," he said. "Not the first time." Then he slid something across the table. A folded piece of paper, yellowed, soft at the corners. I opened it. Inside was a rough sketch of a human figure. Long arms, distorted face, no eyes. And beneath it, in handwritten ink, were 4 words. "It only takes once." When I looked up, he was gone. Just like that. No sound, no footsteps. Just an empty seat across from me and a slowly cooling cup of untouched coffee. I left the diner in a fog. My ears were ringing. Outside, the sky had gone this weird sickly gray, like dusk was trying to force its way in early. I walked to my car, gripping the drawing like it was the only solid thing left in the world. That's when I noticed the passenger side window was cracked open. I never leave it open. Ever. I stepped closer, peered inside. Nothing looked touched, except for the rearview mirror. There was a handprint on it. Small, thin. Long fingers pressed gently into the glass. I started the engine, floored it out of that town and drove for hours, not even checking my phone, not even stopping for gas until the gauge was screaming at me. By the time I pulled into a 24-hour station, I was running on fumes and barely able to keep my eyes open. The clerk gave me a weird look, like he wanted to say something, but didn't. When I asked where the bathroom was, he pointed down a dark hallway without a word. It was the kind of station with flickering lights and tiles that never feel clean, no matter how recently they've been mopped. I stepped into the bathroom, stared at myself in the mirror, and for a second, just a second, my reflection lagged. Like it didn't get the signal right away. Like it forgot how to be me. My arms moved, my head tilted, but the image in the glass stayed still, watching. Then slowly, it smiled. I ran out of there like a man on fire. Didn't even bother paying. I got back on the road and drove until my vision blurred. Eventually, I pulled into a motel off the interstate. Some rundown place with buzzing neon and a woman behind the desk who looked like she hadn't slept in weeks. She handed me the key without asking for ID. I didn't ask her name. I didn't want to hear anyone's voice anymore. That night, I didn't sleep. Couldn't. Not because of the knocking, but because something inside me shifted. Something subtle. I started thinking about that thing in the mirror. The way it smiled, the way it waited. And for the first time in weeks, I wondered, what if I wasn't the one being mimicked? What if I was the mimic? What if it had already taken my place and I just hadn't realized? It's been weeks, maybe months. Hard to tell anymore. I don't check calendars. I don't talk to people. I barely leave the room. I live in motels now, move every few days. I pick places with thin walls and loud neighbors because silence makes it worse. Silence is when I hear it the most. That slow, wet breath behind my ear. That little whisper of me just on the other side of the door. The thing is, I don't know what's real anymore. Not completely. I'll catch myself talking in a voice that doesn't sound like mine, using words I don't normally use, phrasing things in a way that feels off, like someone else is steering and I'm just tagging along. And sometimes, when I close my eyes, I dream I'm still in the woods. Back at that ridge where Travis and I first heard the voice. I see him standing at the edge of the clearing, eyes wide, mouth open, like he's mid-scream, but no sound comes out. And behind him, something huge and pale and wrong shifts between the trees, stretching in ways no human body should. And then he turns around and looks at me, and he has my face. I wake up soaked in sweat, clawing at my skin, looking for some kind of zipper or seam, as if I could pull myself out of this body and find the real me hiding underneath. But there's nothing, just flesh. Flesh that doesn't quite fit right anymore. Last week, I checked into a roadside motel near the Canadian border. Cold place, forested. I should have known better. I told myself I'd just stay the night, then keep moving. But something about the air here feels heavier, like the trees are leaning closer. Listening. The first night, I heard scratching behind the headboard. The second, I heard my own voice humming again. That same lullaby, just outside the window. Last night, I caught a glimpse of myself in the reflection of the TV when it was off. I wasn't blinking, just smiling, watching. I think it's close now. I think whatever followed me out of those woods is done pretending. I think it's waiting for the right moment, the moment I let my guard down, even for a second. I think when that happens, it'll take my place completely, and maybe no one will notice. Maybe it already has. Maybe you're reading this and it isn't me who wrote it. Maybe it's just what's left of me trying to warn you from the dark through someone else's hands. So listen to me. Really listen. If you ever go hiking alone, if you ever hear your own voice calling out to you from the trees, don't answer, don't follow. And for the love of God, don't run, because that's when it learns how to become you. And once it does, it never gives you back. Hi, I'm Lindsay, a 19-year-old who lives in a pretty quiet part of Pennsylvania. You know, the kind of place where everyone knows each other and nothing much happens. I live here with my parents and my two sisters, Mary and Farika. Mary is older than me and has always been the brave one. And Farah, well, she's the baby of the family. We've always been close, but living in a rural area means we have to make our own fun most of the time. So it was Farah's birthday coming up, and we wanted to do something special for her. She hadn't been hiking before, and Mary and I had only done it once, but we figured it would be a fun way to spend the day. We planned to explore the trails in the state game lands. They were a bit off the beaten path, not too far from our house, and hardly anyone ever went there. It sounded perfect for a quiet day out in nature. The night before the hike, we sat around our kitchen table, double-checking our backpacks. We weren't exactly pros, so we made sure to pack all the essentials, pocket knives, flashlights, and a medical kit just in case. Mary joked that we were preparing for an expedition, but I could tell she was a bit nervous. She always had a knack for sensing when something wasn't quite right. The next morning, we started our adventure. The sun was shining and the birds were singing. It felt like the perfect day for a hike. We chatted excitedly as we walked from our house to the base of the hill where the trail started. I remember telling Farah all about the beautiful views we'd see and the cool pictures we could take. As we approached the trail, Mary suddenly turned serious. She reminded us that we were in a pretty secluded area and that there could be animals around. "It is the woods, after all," she said. I rolled my eyes a bit. I knew she was just being her overprotective self, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that maybe she was right to worry. Finally, we reached the parking lot, which was as empty as we expected. The entrance to the trail was marked by two main paths, with occasional blue dots spray-painted on trees to guide hikers. The trail wasn't well known or frequently used, which made it seem more like an adventure to us. We were a couple of newbies, but we were excited to explore this hidden gem so close to home. As we began our hike, Mary took the lead, with me in the middle and Farah bringing up the rear. The first steps onto the trail involved climbing a small but steep hill. I remember feeling a mix of excitement and a tiny bit of apprehension as we ascended. We were just three girls out in the middle of nowhere, relying on each other and a few blue dots to guide us. The trail ahead was beautiful, surrounded by tall trees and the sounds of nature. It was peaceful, just like we wanted. Little did we know, our peaceful hike was about to take a turn we'd never forget. We were deep into our hike, surrounded by the lush greenery of the state game lands. The trail was more beautiful than we remembered, Sunlight streamed through the leaves, creating patterns on the ground that danced as we walked. Mary was leading the way, pointing out different birds and trees. Farah was totally into it, snapping pictures with her phone. I was just happy to be out there with them, feeling the crunch of leaves under my boots and the cool breeze on my face. As we walked, we started to spread out a little. Mary was a few steps ahead, and Farah lagged behind, caught up in capturing every moment. I was in the middle, feeling like the bridge between my adventurous older sister and the wide-eyed wonder of my younger one. Suddenly, the peacefulness of our hike was shattered by a loud rustling noise to our left. It sounded like something big moving through the underbrush. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at Farah, who had stopped taking pictures and was now staring in the direction of the noise, her face a mix of curiosity and fear. Then I looked up at Mary. She had stopped too and was standing completely still, her eyes fixed on something in the woods. I'll never forget the look on her face. It was like she'd seen a ghost. Then, in a voice that was barely more than a whisper, she said, "Turn around, guys." Farah and I were confused. "Why? What's wrong?" I asked, but Mary just repeated herself, more urgently this time. "Turn around and run, now." I'd never heard her sound so scared. Without another word, she started sprinting back the way we came, and Farah followed immediately. I hesitated for a moment, torn between wanting to see what had scared Mary so much and the instinct to flee. I took a quick glance over my shoulder, but I couldn't see anything except trees and shadows. Yet the rustling noise was getting louder, closer. I didn't wait any longer. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my heart racing and my mind filled with terrifying possibilities of what could be behind us. I caught up with Mary and Farah, who were waiting for me just before the entrance to the parking lot. "Why did we run? What did you see?" I panted, trying to catch my breath. Mary shook her head, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm not sure, but we need to keep moving. Let's get out of here." We didn't stop to rest. We jogged all the way back to our house, constantly looking over our shoulders, expecting something to jump out at us at any moment. The peaceful feeling of our hike was gone, replaced by a sense of dread and the unshakable feeling that we were being watched. When we finally made it back home, we collapsed on the front porch, our lungs burning and our legs aching. Mary was still shaking, and Farah was close to tears. I was somewhere in between, feeling scared and confused. "What was that all about?" Farika asked, her voice trembling. Mary took a deep breath. "I saw something in the woods, something big and gray, and it was moving toward us." Her words sent a chill down my spine. What had we stumbled upon in those quiet, secluded woods? What had been lurking just out of sight, watching us? Whatever it was, I knew one thing for sure. Our peaceful hike had turned into a nightmare, and it would be a long time before any of us would feel safe in those woods again. Back on our porch, hearts still racing, we tried to calm down. Mary was the first to speak up. "Okay, I know you guys are freaked out. I am too, but we need to talk about what just happened." Fareka was huddled on the steps, her eyes wide and scared. "What did you see, Mary? You said something about a gray figure?" Mary nodded, taking a deep breath. "When I heard that noise, I turned to look. There was this thing. It was gray, huge, and it looked like it was covered in hair or fur. It was hunched over, maybe 10 feet off the trail. It looked like it was coming toward us." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Are you sure it wasn't just a bear or something?" I asked, trying to rationalize what she had seen. Mary shook her head. "No, it wasn't a bear. This thing was on 2 legs, and it moved differently. I've never seen anything like it." We sat in silence for a moment, each of us lost in our thoughts. The idea of some unknown creature lurking in the woods near our home was terrifying. I remembered stories of Bigfoot and other cryptids, but I had never believed in them. Now I wasn't so sure. "Remember the stories we used to hear from the neighbors?" Mary continued. "About that creature they saw near the woods?" I nodded. Years ago, 2 kids from the neighborhood had talked about seeing a mysterious animal near their home, which was close to the game lands. They described it just like Mary did, but I had always thought they were just making it up. "Their grandmother saw it too," Mary added. She's not the type to believe in fairy tales or monsters, but she swore she saw it. Therica looked from Mary to me, her face pale. Do you think what you saw was that thing? I don't know, Mary admitted, but it's too much of a coincidence, isn't it? The same kind of creature in the same area after all these years. The thought was unsettling. If what Mary saw was the same creature, then it had been living near us for years, unseen and unknown. What else didn't we know about the woods we had grown up near? We should tell Mom and Dad, I suggested. Maybe they know something about it. We spent the rest of the evening talking with our parents about the incident. They were concerned, of course, but also skeptical. They suggested it might have been a misidentified animal, but they agreed to be more cautious and to keep an eye out. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The image of what Mary had described filled my thoughts. A part of me wanted to go back to the trail to see for myself what was out there. But another part of me was scared. Scared of the unknown and what it might mean for us. I eventually drifted off to sleep, but my dreams were filled with shadows and unseen threats lurking just beyond sight. The mystery of the state game lands had taken on a darker, more ominous tone. And I knew our lives would never be the same again. The next morning at breakfast, the atmosphere in our house was different. There was a heaviness, a sense of unspoken fear and curiosity. We all sat around the table eating quietly. The usual morning chatter was replaced by tense silence. Finally, I broke it. Do you think we should go back there to see if we can find anything? I asked, more out of a need to do something than actual desire. Mary shook her head immediately. No way. Whatever that was, I don't want to encounter it again. Farah just hugged her mug of hot chocolate, looking scared. I don't even want to think about it, she whispered. Mom looked at us with concern. I think it's best if you girls stay away from those trails for a while. Whatever you saw, it's better not to take any chances. Dad nodded in agreement. Your safety is the most important thing. There are other places you can explore. The conversation shifted then to plans for the weekend, upcoming school events, anything but the incident in the woods. But the unspoken question lingered in the air. What had Mary really seen? As the day went on, I found myself drawn to the window, looking out at the woods. The curiosity was eating at me. I had always loved mysteries and the unknown, but this was different. This was real, and it was right in our backyard. I decided to do some research. I spent hours online reading about local wildlife, legends, and stories of strange sightings in the area. The more I read, the more I realized how little we knew about the world around us. There were so many stories, so many possibilities. Could what Mary saw be some undiscovered animal, a misidentified creature, or something else entirely? That evening, as we sat in the living room, I shared what I had found with my family. We discussed the possibilities, each of us offering our theories and thoughts. It was strange, but talking about it made it less scary, more like a puzzle to be solved. As I lay in bed that night, I made a resolution. I would continue to explore, to seek out the mysteries of the world, but I would also be more cautious, more aware of the potential dangers. The experience in the woods had changed me, made me realize how vast and unknown the world really is. I fell asleep with a sense of determination and a newfound respect for the mysteries of nature. The incident in the state game lands would remain an unsolved mystery, a reminder of the thin line between curiosity and caution, the known and the unknown. The moment our tires crunched on the gravel driveway of that rental near Mount Rainier, I knew this trip was going to be something else. I've always had a knack for sensing when things are about to turn sideways. Maybe it's the Montana in me, or maybe it's just because I've read too many creepy novels. Either way, as I looked out at the dense Washington forest that surrounded us, I felt an itch at the back of my mind. My friends were a mix of excitement and exhaustion as we unloaded our bags. Alex, the planner of our group, had found this place. Guys, this is going to be epic, he said with a grin that was too wide to be just about the scenery. Sarah, the skeptic, rolled her eyes but couldn't hide her curiosity. And then there was Mark, always ready for anything, camera in hand. We were greeted by Michelle, our rental host, who had the rugged, weathered look of someone who'd spent her life outdoors. She was across the street tending to a horse in a pasture that seemed to stretch into infinity. "Welcome," she called out, her voice carrying a hint of something I couldn't quite place. Intrigue, maybe. We all walked over to greet her, eager to stretch our legs and get to know the place. Michelle had a way about her that was both disarming and slightly unnerving. She offered to show us around her property, and we eagerly agreed. The place was more than just a house. It was a slice of untouched wilderness, complete with more horses and a smattering of other animals. But it was when we crossed over to her backyard, past her quaint wooden house, that things started to get interesting. Michelle gathered us in a circle, her eyes glinting with a mix of mischief and excitement. "So, do you guys want to go back home with a story?" she asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. How could we say no? We followed her past a barn, walking into a part of her backyard that was more forest than garden. The ground was soft underfoot, the air thick with the scent of pine and earth. About 100 feet in, Michelle stopped. "Stop. Look down," she instructed. At our feet was a footprint, but not just any footprint. It was massive, easily twice the size of my own, and oddly shaped, wider and longer than any humans could be. And there were toe imprints, clear as day. "This," Michelle said, a serious tone replacing her earlier playfulness, "was made by a Sasquatch." A Sasquatch. The word hung in the air like a challenge. I glanced at my friends and saw their expressions mirror my own, a mix of disbelief and curiosity. Michelle went on to tell us how she found the imprint, and then, almost as an afterthought, how she had come to own this land and the property across the street where we were staying. Her voice took on a somber note. "You might think I'm crazy, but if I knew about their existence, I would have never moved here. Do you want to see more?" There was a collective pause, a moment where we all considered the sanity of following this path. But adventure has a way of tipping the scales. We nodded, and Michelle led us deeper into the woods. As we walked, the forest seemed to close in around us. The chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves were the only sounds that accompanied our footsteps. I felt a shiver run down my spine, the kind you get when you realize you're part of a story much bigger than yourself. And as the shadows lengthened around us, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were not alone. We ventured further into the dense Washington woods. I felt an uneasiness creep up my spine. I've been in plenty of wild places, but there was something about these woods, shrouded in twilight, that felt different. The trees loomed over us like silent giants, their branches casting long, strange shadows that danced in the breeze. Michelle led us with a confidence that only comes from someone who knows every inch of their land. She was part guide, part storyteller, weaving a narrative that was as captivating as it was unsettling. We were deep in her territory now, far from the comforts of the rental. "Here," Michelle said, stopping suddenly. She pointed at the ground to a cluster of sticks. They were arranged in a way that was too deliberate to be the work of nature. "I laid these out earlier today. Look how they've been moved." We circled around the sticks, the air thick with intrigue. The arrangement was peculiar, like a cryptic message left by an unknown hand. Michelle's theory was that the Sasquatch were mischievous creatures, fond of small pranks like this. It was hard to digest, but out here in the embrace of the wilderness, anything seemed possible. As we walked on, I couldn't shake off the feeling of being watched. The forest had a presence, a personality almost. It was as if the trees themselves were alive with secrets, whispering tales of the unknown. Michelle's next words sent a chill down my spine. "Right about here is where you might feel something unusual," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. And she was right. The air around us felt charged, electric. The hair on my arms stood on end. And I wasn't the only one. Alex looked around nervously, and even Sarah, our group skeptic, seemed uneasy. "They asked me to bring you here," Michelle continued, her voice taking on a solemn tone. "The Sasquatch, I mean. They wanted to say hello." I tried to process her words. Were we really being summoned by a legendary creature, or was this all an elaborate ruse? But before I could ponder further, Michelle posed a question that cut through the silence like a knife. Has any of you recently lost a brother or experienced psychic abilities? We exchanged glances, each of us shaking our heads. The question hung in the air, adding to the thickening plot of our little adventure. Our journey took us to the last point of our walk. Michelle's eyes widened as she examined another set of sticks. "I can't believe it," she murmured. Earlier, she had laid them out, and now they were rearranged, just like the first set. She spoke of how she often left gifts for the Sasquatch, food mostly, and how they always disappeared. I was skeptical, to say the least. I've spent enough time in the wild to know that plenty of creatures could be responsible for missing food. But there was something in Michelle's conviction that made me question my doubts. Just when I thought things couldn't get any stranger, we heard it. A sound that defied description. It was distant but clear. A bizarre chorus of hoots and laughs unlike anything I've ever heard. Michelle's face lit up. "That's them," she said with certainty. "The Sasquatch." We stood there in the heart of the forest, listening to the haunting melody of the wild. It was a moment suspended in time, a crossroads between the known and the unknown. As we made our way back to the cabin, the forest seemed to whisper its secrets, leaving us with more questions than answers. Back at the rental, the night had wrapped itself around the cabin like a dark, enigmatic blanket. We sat on the porch, nursing our drinks, each lost in thought. The conversation swirled around our bizarre encounter, theories tossed back and forth like a game of catch. Alex was all in, buying every word Michelle had said. Sarah remained skeptical, her brows knitted in doubt. And Mark, well, he seemed more interested in capturing the perfect night shot of the woods than joining our debate. The thing about the wilderness is, it has a way of stripping down your beliefs, leaving you raw and open to possibilities you'd scoff at in the light of day. And right then, under the vast starry sky, I felt that vulnerability. "I'm going back out there," declared Alex suddenly, his voice cutting through the night. "I have to see this for myself." Mark, ever the adventurer, didn't hesitate to join him. I watched them disappear into the tree line, their flashlights bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps in the darkness. Left alone, I felt a strange sense of solitude. I wasn't up for chasing shadows in the woods. Instead, I rolled a joint and settled into the quiet, letting the serene beauty of the Washington wilderness wash over me. The cabin, with its warm lights and rustic charm, felt like a sanctuary. But the stillness of the night was deceptive. As I sat there, lost in the tranquility, it happened again. That sound, distant but unmistakable. The eerie, almost otherworldly call that Michelle had attributed to the Sasquatch. It started as an owl's hoot, morphing into that bizarre, monkey-like laughter. I froze, every instinct screaming that this wasn't just some nocturnal animal. There was an intelligence in that sound, a deliberate communication that transcended the barriers of the known world. I wanted to dismiss it, to rationalize it as the trickery of the night. But sitting there alone in the vastness of the wilderness, I couldn't. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly, the sound echoing in my mind long after it had faded away. When Alex and Mark finally returned, I relayed my experience, but they hadn't heard anything. Their skepticism was evident, and I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't heard it with my own ears, I might have been skeptical too. The night wore on, and eventually we retreated to the warmth of the cabin. But sleep was elusive. I lay in bed, my mind racing with questions. What were those sounds? Was Michelle playing an elaborate prank, or was there something more to her stories? Driven by a restless curiosity, I grabbed my phone and did what any modern-day seeker of truth would do. I Googled, "Washington State Creepy Laugh Animal." The first result was an article titled, "Bigfoot or Animals? Hair-Raising Sounds Coming from a Swamp on Indian Reservation in Oregon." My heart skipped a beat. The description matched what I had heard perfectly. As I lay there staring into the darkness, I realized that the wilderness holds more mysteries than we can fathom. And sometimes the line between legend and reality is thinner than we dare to believe. Morning in the Washington wilderness is like waking up in a different world. The light filters through the trees in a soft golden haze, painting everything in a hue of tranquility. But that morning, as I sat on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, the beauty of the surroundings was overshadowed by the lingering questions from the previous night. The article I had found about the Bigfoot sounds in Oregon was still open on my phone. I reread it, searching for some clue, some rational explanation. But the words just danced around the possibility of the unknown, offering no concrete answers. Alex and Mark were the first to join me, their steps heavy with the lack of any real discovery from their nocturnal expedition. Sarah followed, her skepticism now mixed with a tinge of curiosity. We sat there in silence, each of us lost in our own thoughts. The conversation from last night resumed, but with a different tone. Now, there was a sense of wonder, a willingness to entertain the idea that maybe, just maybe, there was more to Michelle's stories than we had initially believed. It was time to leave the cabin, to say goodbye to the mystery that had enveloped us for the past couple of days. We packed our things, the mood subdued. The encounter with the unknown had touched each of us in different ways, leaving a mark that wouldn't easily fade. As we loaded the car, Michelle appeared. Her demeanor was the same as when we first met her, a mix of the earthly and the ethereal. "I hope you found what you were looking for," she said, her eyes twinkling with unspoken knowledge. We exchanged farewells, but her words stayed with me. Had we found what we were looking for, or had we stumbled upon a mystery that was never meant to be solved? The drive back was quiet, each mile taking us further away from the enigmatic woods and back to our reality. But the wilderness has a way of staying with you, its mystery seeping into your soul. In the days that followed, I found myself diving deeper into the lore of the Sasquatch, reading accounts, watching documentaries. The skeptic in me battled with the part that had heard those unexplainable sounds in the dark. The rational part of my brain argued for logic, but the primal part, the part that had sat alone on that porch, knew that some things defy explanation. I realized then that the wilderness is more than just trees and wildlife. It's a living, breathing entity filled with secrets and stories that go back centuries. And sometimes it chooses to reveal a glimpse of its mysteries, not to provide answers, but to remind us that there are things in this world beyond our understanding. As I sat at my desk, the city noises a stark contrast to the serene silence of the woods. I knew the experience would stay with me. The line between legend and reality might be blurred, but sometimes the mystery is more important than the truth. In the end, our Sasquatch experience in Washington state was a journey into the unknown, a reminder of the vast and unexplored mysteries that lie hidden in the heart of the wilderness. This trail has been closed since 1986. I found out why. I've been a park ranger for almost 5 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Drunken campers, lost hikers, black bears pawing through dumpsters, even the occasional cryptic scratch mark on tree trunks that someone swore was from a mountain lion, despite the fact that we haven't had those around here in decades. But last month, I found something that's been gnawing at my brain ever since. It was late October, just before the snow really starts coming down in the northern Rockies. I was pulling solo duty at Pine Haven National Park, a massive stretch of wilderness in Montana that doesn't get nearly as many visitors as places like Glacier or Yellowstone. It's quieter, less polished, and honestly, it's my favorite post. That night, I was supposed to patrol the Eastern Ridge trails, make sure no idiots were sneaking into camp without permits. We'd had issues before, college kids from Missoula thinking they're invincible, ignoring the warnings about early snow, or worse, the missing persons reports that still trickled in every couple of years. I was finishing up my thermos of gas station coffee, sitting in the cracked leather seat of the Ranger truck, when the radio crackled. "Unit 4, you copy," I grabbed the mic. "Yeah, this is 4. "Hey, got a report of a light on the Elk Ridge Trail. Thought you should check it out before you clock out." "Probably nothing." My stomach sank. Elk Ridge had been officially closed since 1986 after a rock slide wiped out a good chunk of the switchbacks. The park never reopened it. Too unstable, they said. But every now and then, you'd hear stories. Strange figures spotted near the trailhead, weird noises coming from that part of the park at night. Hikers who got turned around and ended up back there and didn't come out. Copy that, I said, trying to sound casual, though I felt my fingers tense up on the steering wheel. I headed east, bumping along the dirt road, pine trees crowding in on both sides. The further I drove, the more isolated it felt, the kind of isolation that makes your skin crawl. I couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror every so often, half expecting to see headlights behind me, though I knew no one else should be out here. When I reached the Elk Ridge trailhead, I killed the engine and stepped out. The wind cut through my uniform, sharp and cold, and I pulled my jacket tighter. The place was choked with overgrowth, thorny brush curling over what was once a well-maintained path, wooden signs, long rotted and splintered, some sagging to the ground. And then I saw it, a flicker of orange light maybe 50 yards up the trail, just past a bend. I told myself it was probably a lost hiker with a lantern or a flashlight. Maybe even some dumb teens trying to scare each other. I radioed back, told them I was going in to check it out. As I made my way up the trail, the crunch of gravel and dead leaves under my boots sounded impossibly loud. I kept glancing over my shoulder, swearing I heard faint shuffling behind me. But every time I turned, the woods stood still, dark and unmoving. The light stayed steady ahead, just out of reach, like it was leading me deeper in. I should have turned back. Instead, I kept moving. About 20 minutes up, the trail narrowed. I rounded a sharp curve where the trees thinned slightly, and that's when I saw him. A man standing by what looked like the collapsed remains of an old wooden bridge. He was facing away from me, motionless, wearing what looked like a ranger's uniform, or at least what used to be a ranger's uniform. The fabric was faded, sun-bleached, the sleeves shredded. His boots were caked with mud, one laced, the other flopping open like he'd forgotten how to tie it. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound firm, though my throat felt tight. "This trail's closed. You all right?" He didn't turn, didn't even flinch. The lantern at his feet burned with that strange, steady glow, not flickering like a regular flame, more like a dim, constant beam. I took a cautious step closer, hand instinctively moving to the radio clipped on my shoulder. "Sir, you need to come with me. This area is off limits." Still nothing. And then his head jerked like he'd been yanked by invisible strings, twisting slightly toward me, but not all the way. I couldn't see his face clearly. Just the outline of a sunken cheek, a mouth half open. His jaw twitched once, then again, like he was trying to speak but couldn't form words. That's when I noticed the patch on his shoulder, Pine Haven Ranger Service. But the logo, it was the old design, the one they stopped using decades ago, and his name tag, barely hanging on by a thread, read Murray. I know that name. I've seen it in the break room on a faded, yellowed missing persons notice from 1986. Ranger Charles Murray disappeared during a routine patrol on Elk Ridge Trail. Never found. Presumed dead. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest, and then he turned fully. I can't describe his face, not really. It wasn't rotted, not like a corpse, but it wasn't right either. His skin looked wrong, like wax left too close to a fire, sagging and warped. His eyes were wide, glassy, and his mouth hung open just enough to reveal cracked, dark teeth. He lifted one arm, pointing past me down the trail. His hand trembled violently, and when he finally spoke, his voice came out like a rasping whisper. "Turn back." I didn't wait. I ran. I didn't look back, not until I was nearly to the truck, lungs burning, vision swimming. When I finally dared to glance over my shoulder, the trail was empty. The light was gone. The woods stood silent and dark as if nothing had ever been there. I drove back to the ranger station, shaking so hard I almost clipped a tree on the way down. I didn't report what I saw. I told them there was no one up there. No lights. Nothing. But the next night, when I was alone in the office, I went to the old records. I pulled Murray's file, and I found something I wish I hadn't. Scrawled on the last page, barely legible, was a note from the original search team. Do not reopen Elk Ridge. If anyone sees lights or hears the name Murray, tell them to leave. Do not let them follow. I don't know what's up there. I just know I'm never going back. That night, even after I got home, small, creaky apartment above the old bakery in town, I just sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on, jacket still zipped up. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept replaying it over and over, that sagging face, those trembling fingers pointing, that voice like dry leaves scraping across the ground. Turn back. God. By morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was exhaustion, long shift, thin mountain air, maybe even leftover adrenaline. I hadn't eaten much that day, hadn't drunk enough water. Rangers sometimes joked about trail madness, the way your mind plays tricks on you when you're alone too long in the woods. I wanted to believe that's all it was. But then the messages started. The first came through the park's central radio midday. Unit 4, check in. I pressed the mic. 4 here. We got another report, dispatch crackled back. Hikers said they saw a ranger up by the old Elk Ridge overlook. My stomach dropped. That can't be right, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. That trail's blocked. No one should be up there. That's what we told them, but they were pretty insistent. Said the guy was in uniform, waving them down. I almost dropped the mic. My fingers felt ice cold. I'll take a look. I didn't want to go. Every bone in my body screamed at me to turn off the radio, make up an excuse, do anything else. But I'd been a ranger long enough to know you can't ignore a call. So I went. The drive out was even worse this time. The air felt heavier, like the sky was pressing down on the forest. My ears kept popping the way they do when you're gaining elevation, except I wasn't. I was heading across a familiar flat stretch. It was like the pressure was wrong somehow, like the atmosphere was off just around that part of the park. I reached the overlook trailhead by late afternoon. It was quiet, way too quiet. Usually, you hear at least some bird chatter, maybe the distant knock of a woodpecker, squirrels rustling in the underbrush. Today, nothing, just dead air. I stepped onto the path, moving slow, boots crunching through frostbitten leaves. The trees here were old, towering lodgepole pines mixed with ancient Douglas fir, their bark blackened and scarred from wildfires decades past. The trail twisted ahead, pale and narrow, half swallowed by creeping vines and roots. About halfway up, I saw it. A boot print. Fresh. Not from a hiker. Too heavy. Too wide. More like a work boot. Ranger issue. My heartbeat spiked. I crouched down, fingers brushing the dirt. There was a faint drag mark, too, like whoever made the print had stumbled or limped. I followed the trail carefully, every step feeling like I was walking into a trap. The light was fading fast. Twilight in the woods is a strange thing. Shadows thicken, and everything feels closer, tighter, like the trees are leaning in to listen. At the crest of the ridge, I spotted something through the branches. A figure. Not moving, just standing there. I raised my voice. "Hey, park ranger here? Are you all right?" The figure didn't react. I forced myself forward, closer. Now I could see he was facing away, just like before. Same uniform, old design, patch barely hanging on, same muddy boots. It was him. "Murray," I called out, throat dry. The figure twitched. My breath hitched. I took a shaky step back, instinct roaring in my chest. And then, in a voice like brittle paper, "You shouldn't be here." I wanted to run. God, I wanted to turn and run, but my legs locked up. My mouth opened, trying to form words, but nothing came out. He turned slightly, enough that I could see the ruined edge of his face, cracked skin, sunken eyes, the corners of his mouth torn upward in a grotesque, slack smile. "Go back." And then, behind him, deeper in the trees, something moved. I don't know what it was. I couldn't see it clearly. Just a shape, tall, thin, gliding between the pines, barely making a sound. My brain scrambled, trying to make sense of it. Another person? An animal? But no, it was too tall, too smooth. Almost human, but not. I stumbled backward, heart hammering against my ribs. Murray's head snapped toward the movement, and for the first time I saw something flicker across his ruined face. Panic. He lifted one arm, pointing frantically at me. "Go." That broke the spell. I turned and ran. I don't remember the sprint back down the trail. I don't remember the drive. I just remember bursting into the ranger station, slamming the door behind me, chest heaving, lungs on fire. One of the other rangers, Sarah, looked up from her paperwork. "Jesus, you look like hell. What happened?" I tried to speak, but all I could manage was a broken, breathless whisper. "Something's up there." She frowned, confused. "On Elk Ridge? I thought you said it was just a dead trail." I shook my head. "No, there's something on that mountain." She opened her mouth, probably to tell me to calm down, but just then the radio crackled. "Unit 4, come in." It was dispatch. I snatched up the mic. "This is 4. A pause. Then, in a voice I swear to God sounded just like mine, distorted and slow. "Don't leave." I dropped the mic. Sarah's face went pale. We both just stared at each other. The static from the radio filled the room, the words echoing in the back of my skull. "Don't leave." I didn't sleep that night either. And I knew, deep in my gut, this wasn't over. I didn't go into work the next day. I told them I was sick, called Sarah early, voice shaking, said I had chills, fever, whatever I could think of. She sounded surprised but didn't push. Honestly, I think she was relieved. Maybe she thought I needed a break after the weirdness yesterday. But the truth is, I didn't want to be anywhere near the park. I stayed holed up in my apartment, blinds drawn, sitting on the couch with the TV on, just for background noise. Netflix played some dumb cooking show on loop, but I wasn't watching. I just sat there staring at the wall, replaying everything over and over. Murray's face, that thing behind him moving through the trees, the voice on the radio. My voice, warped and slow, telling me, "Don't leave." By evening, I thought maybe I was cracking up. I even Googled stress-induced hallucinations, paranoia, auditory distortions, anything to explain what was happening. Maybe it was burnout, or maybe I just spent too much time alone in the woods. I was halfway convincing myself of that when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" At first, just static. Then a faint voice, barely audible over the hiss. "Come back." I slammed the phone down so hard it bounced off the coffee table. I didn't sleep again. By 3 a.m., I was pacing the apartment, sweaty, jittery, jumping at every creak and car passing outside. I knew I couldn't stay like this. I needed answers. And there was only one place I was going to get them. By dawn, I was driving back toward Pine Haven. I kept telling myself I wasn't going to do anything stupid. I'd just swing by the ranger station, pull the old files, maybe talk to some of the senior guys. Hell, maybe I'd even tell Sarah what was going on. She'd seen how shaken I was. Maybe she'd believe me. But as soon as I pulled into the lot, I saw the station door hanging open. My stomach knotted. I killed the engine, stepped out carefully, listening. The place was quiet, except for the soft rattle of the wind through the flagpole. "Hello?" I called softly. "Sarah?" No answer. Inside, the lights were flickering. Papers were scattered across the floor. Chairs knocked over. Someone's coffee mug lay shattered on the ground. Dark liquid pooled beneath. I edged toward the back office, where we kept the records. My boots crunched softly over the mess. I reached for the handle and froze. On the door, scratched deep into the wood, were the words, "Stay away from the ridge." My breath hitched. I pushed inside. The office was a disaster zone. Filing cabinets yanked open, folders whipped apart. But one thing caught my eye. An old cardboard box shoved into the corner, half buried under loose files. I dragged it out. Inside were photographs, yellowed, curling at the edges. Black and white shots of the park from decades ago. Rangers standing proudly at trailheads. Groups posing near waterfalls. Smiling faces by the old ranger station that had burned down years ago. And then, near the bottom, I found something different. A photo of Murray. He looked younger, clean-shaven, smiling awkwardly at the camera, one hand resting on a tree trunk. But behind him, just barely visible, was a shadow. Not a trick of the light. Not a person. A shape. Tall, thin, smooth. Almost human. I felt a cold sweat break out down my back. My fingers trembled as I pulled out another photo. This one from a search party. Rangers standing in a line, flashlights pointed into the dark, faces tense. Again, in the distance, the shape, watching. I slammed the box shut. That's when I heard the bang. I spun, heart hammering. The front door of the station was swinging open, slamming hard against the wall in the wind. No, not the wind. A figure stood just outside. I barely saw it. Just a flash. Ranger uniform, faded, ragged, face pale and sunken. Murray. He stood there, half shrouded in shadow, one hand raised, trembling. I could barely hear it, but his lips moved. Behind you. I turned, chest clenching, and saw for the briefest moment the reflection in the office window. Tall, thin, smooth, no face, no eyes. It was right behind me. I didn't think. I bolted, ran straight out the back door through the trees, stumbling over roots and brush, branches clawing at my arms and face. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just ran. By the time I reached my truck, my breath was coming in sharp, ragged gasps. I fumbled with the keys, heart pounding so hard it felt like it was about to crack my ribs open. When I finally peeled out of the lot, tires skidding over gravel, I dared a glance back at the station. Empty. No figure. No shadow. But just as I turned onto the main road, I saw something in the rearview mirror. For a split second, standing at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, smooth, watching. I don't know what it wants, but I know it's not done with me yet. I didn't go home. After I tore out of the Pine Haven lot, I just kept driving. Past the park boundary, past the small grocery store where the locals buy their bait and beer. Past the gas station that always smells like burnt coffee. I didn't even know where I was headed. I just needed to move. By the time I stopped, I was 2 hours south in a Walmart parking lot, hands shaking on the steering wheel, chest tight like I'd been holding my breath the entire drive. I sat there as the sun dipped behind the mountains, watching families shuffle in and out of the store, listening to the faint, hollow hum of some teenager's bass-heavy music thumping from a nearby car. It should have felt normal. It should have been comforting. But it wasn't. Even here, surrounded by people, I felt it. Like something was standing just out of sight, just beyond the corners of my vision, watching, waiting. I pulled out my phone, scrolling aimlessly, looking for something to ground me. I even pulled up Murray's missing person file again, rereading the details, like maybe I'd missed something. Patrol gone wrong, radioed in his location, never returned. Declared missing after 48 hours. Except they did find something. I dug back into the search reports I'd photographed earlier, flicking through the images until I found the small, crumpled note they'd logged. Do not let anyone follow. What the hell did that mean? Was Murray warning me? Or was he part of this? Now I sat there, the question swirling in my brain like dirty water down a drain, until my phone buzzed in my hand. Unknown number. Again. I froze for a long moment, just staring at the screen. The little green accept button seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. Against every ounce of common sense, I answered. Hello? No static this time, just breathing. Slow, shallow, wet sounding. Then a whisper, low and cracked, like someone speaking through a broken mouth. You're already marked. My stomach lurched. I hung up so fast I nearly dropped the phone. For a few minutes, I just sat there shaking, trying to slow my breathing. I wanted to call someone, a friend, another ranger, even the sheriff. But who the hell would believe me? Hi! Yeah! I think a dead ranger and some faceless thing are following me. Yeah, that'd go over well. Instead, I forced myself to think. If whatever this was had attached itself to me, how did I break it? The only thing that made sense was going back. I didn't want to. God, I did not want to. But if I just kept running, how long before it found me anyway? I waited until full dark before I turned the truck around. The highway back to Pine Haven was a black ribbon, winding through endless pine and spruce. Every now and then, headlights from an oncoming car would flash by, momentarily lighting the trees, making me jump every time I thought I saw movement at the edge of the road. By midnight, I was back at the park boundary. The gates were closed. I parked the truck, killed the engine, and stepped out into the cold. The wind whispered through the trees, sending dry needles skittering across the pavement. Somewhere far off, a lone owl called. The rest was silence. I climbed the locked gate, boots slipping slightly on the icy metal, and dropped down on the other side. The park stretched out ahead, dark and still. My breath puffed out in clouds as I hiked toward the trailhead. And then, a light just ahead. Flickering orange. Lantern light. I crept forward slowly, heart pounding in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to stop. And there he was, Murray, standing at the mouth of the Elk Ridge Trail, same tattered uniform, same ruined face. He raised one hand, trembling, and for the first time I saw his eyes clearly. They were wide, terrified, not at me, but at something behind him. He mouthed one word, "Run." And then I heard it, a dragging sound like something impossibly tall sliding through the trees, not walking, not stepping, gliding. I stumbled back, but my boot slipped on the frost and I hit the ground hard, breath knocked from my lungs. From where I lay, I could just barely see past Murray, and in the shadows beyond, it was there. The shape, tall, thin, smooth, no face, no eyes, no mouth, but I felt it watching me. It raised one long, impossibly thin arm and pointed not at me, at Murray. Murray turned sharply, mouth opening in a silent scream, and in an instant he was gone, like smoke sucked into a vacuum. No sound, no flash, just gone. I scrambled to my feet, sprinting back toward the gate, lungs burning, legs shaking. I could hear it behind me. Not footsteps, but a pressure. A pull, like the very air was bending, warping, chasing. I didn't stop until I hit the gate, nearly falling as I climbed over, tearing my jacket on the barbed top. When I landed on the other side, I didn't look back. I ran straight for the truck, slammed the door, and peeled out onto the highway, tires screeching. And for a long time, I just drove. I don't remember how long, maybe hours, maybe all night. But by the time I stopped, the sun was just starting to rise, pink and gold creeping over the mountains. I sat there shaking, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. And for a moment, just a moment, I thought I saw something move in the back seat. But when I turned, the seat was empty. I don't know what it wants, but I don't think I left it behind. I didn't go home. I couldn't. The thought of stepping into my dark, narrow apartment, drawing the blinds, turning off the lights, it made my skin crawl. I kept picturing that empty space behind me in the rearview mirror, imagining the faintest shift of a shadow, the slightest creak of floorboards under weight that shouldn't be there. So I drove, all morning, all afternoon. I pulled through Starbucks twice, not because I was hungry, but because the chatter of the workers, the hiss of the espresso machine, the ambient noise, it made me feel normal for brief moments. I didn't tell anyone. Not Sarah, not my supervisor, not the sheriff. Hell, not even the guy at the drive-through window who gave me a second cup by mistake and joked, "Long night, huh?" If I opened my mouth, it all comes spilling out. And I didn't know how to explain it without sounding insane. By early evening, I found myself parked outside a Walmart again, this time in a neighboring town. I watched shoppers push carts stacked with bottled water, toilet paper, snacks, garden mulch, just everyday, boring stuff. I craved that mundanity like oxygen. My phone buzzed, blocked number. I squeezed it in my hand so hard I thought the screen would crack. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but I didn't press it. It stopped ringing. And then a text. "You can't run." No punctuation, no capital letters. I felt bile rise in my throat. I shut the phone off and tossed it onto the passenger seat, forcing myself to breathe. My hands were shaking again, a fine, uncontrollable tremor. I ran my palms over my face, willing myself to think, to do something. I didn't know what. Then, tap, tap, tap. I jolted. Someone was at the window. A man, mid-40s maybe. Scruffy beard, wearing a green hiking jacket and cargo pants. He smiled awkwardly when I jumped, holding up both hands like, sorry. I cracked the window. "Hey, sorry, man," he said, voice a little hoarse. "Didn't mean to startle you." "It's fine," I mumbled. "Just, are you a ranger?" His eyes flicked to the gear on my passenger seat, the Pine Haven jacket, the radio, the battered park map. "Yeah," I said warily. His face shifted, lips tightening. "You were at Pine Haven last night, weren't you?" My stomach dropped. "How do you know that?" "I was there too." He glanced around as if checking who was nearby. Saw the light up on Elk Ridge. Saw something else too. I stared at him, pulse hammering in my ears. He leaned in slightly. "I don't know what you saw, man, but it's following me too." A rush of cold hit my spine. We sat there in silence for a second. I looked him over, trying to gauge if this was some weird joke or a desperate, grasping truth. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed dark with exhaustion. His hands gripping the window edge trembled faintly. "What did you see?" I asked quietly. His jaw worked. "I don't even know. I was hiking up near the old trail, heard something moving, saw a lantern. I thought maybe someone was lost. But then he stopped, swallowing hard. I ran, he finished. I've been running since. A thought hit me, sharp, electric, terrifying. If he was marked too, maybe we could figure this out together. Maybe we weren't completely alone in this. I killed the engine, unlocked the door, and stepped out. "Let's talk," I said. He nodded, glancing nervously over his shoulder. Yeah, okay. My car is just over here." I followed him, heart pounding, every nerve on edge. We crossed the parking lot toward a dusty gray Subaru parked under one of the flickering overhead lights. He fumbled with his keys, hands shaking worse now, and I caught the faintest tremor in his voice as he said, "I don't know how to stop this, man. I haven't slept in 2 days. I keep thinking." Click. He unlocked the door, and that's when I saw it through the back window in the reflection. It was standing behind us. Tall, thin, smooth. No face. My throat closed up, and before I could even yell, he turned just in time to see it. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The thing raised one arm, long and jointless, pointing, not at him, not at me, but at the car. For one awful moment, I saw his face twist in realization, sheer, unfiltered terror. And then, like smoke in the wind, he was gone. Just gone. His keys clattered to the ground. The only sound in the empty lot. I staggered back, chest heaving, heart in my throat. I wanted to scream, wanted to run, but my legs locked. The thing didn't move. It just stood there, watching, waiting, and then it raised its hand again, this time pointing at me. My vision blurred, and a roaring sound filled my head like rushing water. My knees buckled, and I dropped to the ground, gasping, clawing at the pavement as if I could hold onto the world. And then, as suddenly as it started, it was gone. The lot was empty. The Subaru sat there unlocked, abandoned, and I was alone. Alone, but marked. I don't remember how I got back to the truck. I don't remember starting the engine or pulling onto the road or even driving the first 20 miles. I just remember the feeling, that hollow, ringing emptiness inside my chest, like something had been scooped out of me. Like my body was running on fumes, the shell of a person just barely holding together. By the time I realized where I was going, the sign was already in front of me. Pine Haven National Park, closed for winter season. The gates loomed up, chains tangled around the bars. I sat there in the cab, watching the trees sway in the wind, headlights carving faint shapes in the underbrush. I knew it was a trap. I knew going back was insane. But what was the alternative? Keep running until it took me? Sit in some motel room until I faded out like the man in the Walmart lot? I stepped out of the truck. The cold hit me like a slap, sharp and biting, but it barely registered. My fingers worked numbly at the gate, pulling at the chains until they gave just enough for me to slip through. And then I was walking back toward Elk Ridge, back toward the trail that had been closed since 1986. The woods were silent, except for the faint whisper of wind. My boots crunched over the frostbitten dirt, the air sharp in my lungs. Every step felt heavier, like something was pressing against me. Not just the cold, not just the fear, but something bigger, thicker. Like the very air was closing in. I reached the mouth of the trail, and there, waiting, was Murray. Same sunken eyes, same tattered uniform, same trembling hand raised in warning. But this time I didn't stop. I stepped closer. His mouth opened, jaw shaking, that voice scraping out like dry leaves. "You can't." I shook my head. "I don't have a choice." His hand dropped. His shoulders sagged like some invisible weight had crushed the last bit of fight out of him. And then slowly, he turned. He walked ahead, lantern flickering dimly in his hand, leading me up the trail. I followed. We climbed higher, past the broken switchbacks, past the dead trees and overgrown brush, until we reached the ridge. The wind howled here, sharp and endless, rattling through the burned-out trees. And waiting at the top, it stood. Tall, thin, smooth. No face, no mouth, no eyes. But I felt its gaze lock onto me. For a moment, Murray stood between us, lantern shaking, shoulders tense. And then the thing lifted one long, jointless arm and pointed, not at me, at him. Murray's body jerked, head snapping up, mouth opening in a silent scream as his form began to unravel, pieces fading like ash in the wind. I lunged forward instinctively, reaching out. No, but my hand passed straight through him, catching only cold, empty air. In a heartbeat, he was gone, just like the others. And then the thing turned its hand, pointing at me. I fell to my knees, chest heaving, heart slamming so hard I thought my ribs would crack open. I could feel it pulling at me, the same unraveling force, the same hollow emptiness creeping into my bones. But then a voice, low, faint, right by my ear. Run. I don't know how. I don't know where the strength came from, but my legs moved. I ran. I ran like hell, stumbling, crashing through the underbrush, breath burning in my throat. Behind me, I could feel the air twisting, warping, the forest bending in impossible ways. Trees groaned and split. The ground seemed to ripple under my feet. But I ran, all the way back down the ridge, all the way through the forest, all the way to the truck. I didn't look back. I couldn't look back. When I finally reached the truck, I slammed the door shut, fumbled the keys, and peeled out onto the main road, driving faster than I ever have in my life. The forest fell away behind me, dark and silent. I didn't stop. Not until I crossed the county line. Not until I saw the familiar glow of gas stations, fast food joints, Walmart, Costco, the real world bleeding back in, grounding me. But even now, even as I sit here in a crowded McDonald's parking lot, surrounded by people, music, lights, I can still feel it. Watching, waiting. I don't know why it hasn't finished the job. I don't know if it's done with me. But I know one thing. I'll never go back. Not to Pine Haven, not to Elk Ridge, not to that trail. Because some places, they were never meant to be reopened. I've been a fire lookout for about a year now. I spend most of my life alone in a small, window-lined, one-room shack atop a steel and wood-frame tower in the middle of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. My only companions are my collection of cheap novels, a laptop computer with infrequent and unreliable internet service, and the two-way radio I use to communicate with the few nearby towers and ranger stations. Nearby is a bit of a misnomer, though. Using my high-powered binoculars, I can just barely make out Tower 12 on a clear day, situated several miles to my west. Tower 15, the next nearest to my location, only appears as a glint of sunlight to my east when the sun catches it just right. I've been told the Parks Department intends to put up some additional towers in this area as soon as it gets the necessary funding, which is probably no time soon. That's fine with me, though. I like the solitude. It helps quiet my mind, keeps the memories at bay. Mostly, I occupy my days either with simple maintenance in and around the tower or scanning the dense trees all around me for any signs of trouble. It's been a dry year, so the threat of fire is a constant one. This particular afternoon, I was clearing some brush from around the base of the tower that had begun to encroach on the fire road leading back to the nearby ranger station 20 miles away. Even with the heavy suspension of the government-issued Jeep, the road was a harsh ride at the best of times. I had just finished dragging some brush cuttings off into the tree line when the radio clipped to my belt squawked. Tower 9. This is Tower 12. Do you copy? It was Billy Johnson, my supervisor. Nice enough guy, I suppose. Tended to leave me alone most of the time. I straightened up and stretched my back, wiping the sweat from my eyes with my forearm and keyed the microphone attached to my shoulder. Go for Tower 9, I replied as I replaced the shears and bow saw into the small storage shed near the base of the stairs. John, do you have eyes on a bit of smoke north of your position? Stand by, Billy, I said, snatching up my water bottle and jogging to the metal staircase that wound its way around the tower. I didn't bother locking the 8-foot chain-link fence surrounding my little compound. Chances were, I'd be back soon enough. Reaching the top, I stepped through the trapdoor and onto the walkway that circled the cabin, closing it behind me. It was habit at this point. The last thing I needed was to take an errant step and tumble down through the open hatch. I'd probably end up breaking my neck. As I passed by, I reached into the open door of the shack and grabbed the binoculars hanging on a nearby hook. Rounding the railed corner of the walkway and turning my attention to the dark green blanket of trees stretching out before me, I saw the smoke almost instantly. A thin trickle of wispy white haze rose lazily above the canopy some distance off. Probably just some campers, I figured, though there weren't any approved campsites in that area. We always had more than a few folks each season who decided that camping off-trail in the deep bush sounded like quite a hoot. Most of them come back just fine, oblivious to the danger that this wilderness presents to anyone not adequately prepared. Some of them have to be brought out by search and rescue. Some of them just don't come back. A ranger or a random hiker might occasionally come across the deserted remains of a campsite and report it in. Those are the spooky ones, the ones where people just vanished and left behind a perfectly set up campsite. No explanation, no clues, just a deserted clearing, often with perfectly intact tents and personal effects. But there are bears and mountain lions, along with a handful of lesser predators that roam these forests, and sometimes they get hungry enough to stalk and even kill humans. And that doesn't even take into consideration the much more likely scenario. Folks stepping out of their tents at night to take a piss and very quickly getting lost. Most humans aren't suited to survival in the wilderness, unfortunately. My radio squawked again. Tower 9, what's the word? Yeah, I see it, Billy. Looks to be a couple of miles due north of my tower. What's your plan? He asked. I knew what he meant. Keep an eye on it and hope for the best, or take a trip over and investigate. After a brief pause, I sighed with resignation. It's probably just a campfire, but I guess I better head over and take a look to be sure. I didn't relish the thought of trekking to that area of wilderness, to be honest. It was the only area I hadn't explored during my time here. There weren't many trails heading in that direction, and the ones that did were badly overgrown and too narrow for the Jeep. A couple of miles hike might not seem like a lot, but when you're out here alone, the dense trees seem to stretch on forever. 2 miles can feel like 100. Roger that, John, Billy replied. Take your pack and your rifle. Check in periodically. Will do. Tower 9 out, I said, replacing the binoculars on their hook and shouldering the red canvas backpack waiting dutifully in the corner chair. I grabbed the rifle from its rack over the doorframe, checked to make sure it was loaded, and headed out. As I locked the gate behind me, I threw my pack in the back of the Jeep and set the rifle beside it. The Jeep wouldn't get me too far before the brush made the trail impassable, but if it saved me even half a mile of hiking, it was well worth it. The sun was still high in the sky. I had plenty of time to get there and back before dusk, as long as I didn't dawdle. I started the engine and turned the wheels toward the unmaintained trail to my right. After only a few moments, the trees and canopy obscured any trace of the watchtower behind me. I was actually able to push the Jeep farther than expected. A pleasant surprise. I was probably a mile along the trail before it bent, and a massive pine lay across the path, much too large to go over. The dense underbrush around me ruled out the possibility of going around. I immediately lamented not bringing the chainsaw. Cutting it up and winching the pieces out of the way wouldn't have been too difficult and would have saved me a ton of trouble. With a quiet curse, I stepped out of the Jeep and grabbed my gear from the back seat. I smiled to myself as a quote from a certain fictional adventure-seeking archaeologist suddenly came to mind. We walk from here. Making sure to mark the location of the Jeep on my handheld GPS, I stepped over the thigh-high tree trunk and continued along the path. According to my earlier estimate, the trail was heading in the direction of the smoke, which was a blessing in my book. The less time I had to spend bushwhacking, the better. The trail continued to narrow, as I expected, and before long, I was brushing branches and leaves with my shoulders as I walked. The trees, which had been alive with the cheering and chirping of animal life near the tower, now seemed muted. The forest around me was growing denser, feeling oddly claustrophobic at times. Billy checked in a few times, and I updated him on my progress, promising to maintain regular contact. He advised me that a weather relay from the ranger station had reported an approaching storm, likely to reach us before nightfall. A quick glance at my watch made me wince. I had already spent more time than I'd predicted. Maybe it was best to turn around and head back. The last thing I wanted was to get caught out here overnight with minimal supplies and a rainstorm. I wasn't worried, but it sure wouldn't be comfortable. If I'd been farther from my destination, I probably would have turned back right then. I wish I had. Within another 20 minutes, however, I smelled the faint scent of a wood fire. Not strong, but definitely there. I was even more certain of what I'd find when I reached them. When I stepped out of the now almost non-existent trail, I found myself in a sparsely treed area amidst a dozen or so wooden shacks, and I halted in surprise. I had reached the base of a hilly rise covered in heavy forest, and these old, forgotten cabins looked like they had belonged to some sort of small settlement. Perhaps an old logging camp, I thought. I didn't know this place even existed, and made a mental note to research it when I got back to my tower. I keyed the microphone. "Tower 12, this is John. Do you copy?" Billy replied, his voice staticky and distant. "Hey, John, Tower 12, what's your status?" I frowned and looked around at the towering trees all around me. I suppose I was asking more out of the portable radio than was reasonable. I was lucky I still had any signal at all. "I found what looks like an old logging or trapping camp," I said, meandering among the decaying and derelict cabins. Most had collapsed roofs and were barely standing. "The campfire has to be nearby. I'm going to take a look around a bit more." There was a pause before Billy spoke again. "What's your current location, John?" I glanced at my handheld GPS and relayed my position. Another pause. "John, I think you should probably just turn back. Come back, okay? You don't have many more hours of daylight left, and that storm looks like it's getting worse." Something in his voice sounded off, but I couldn't quite place it. Nervous, maybe? I couldn't blame him. My safety was his responsibility, and the idea of one of his lookouts being caught out in a storm overnight probably didn't sit well. Coincidentally, it didn't sit well with me either. "You may be right, Billy," I replied, turning around and casting my eyes over the area. "I'll just head." I stopped as my eyes caught sight of a bright yellow nylon tent just beyond the last of the structures. "Repeat your last, John." "I didn't get that." "Stand by." "Tower 12, I said absently, making my way toward what I now realized was a small cluster of 3 modern tents situated around a central fire ring. The fire had been completely extinguished, but the embers still smoldered lowly, the source of the smoke. I looked around for the campers. Nothing. No one in sight or earshot. Sleeping bags and electric lanterns were still inside the tents, though I couldn't find any backpacks or supplies. "Hello?" I called out, turning in a circle. "I'm with the Forest Service. Is anyone here?" Nothing, just the muted echo of my own voice. I was about to dump some dirt on the remaining embers of the campfire and call it a day when I noticed the narrow footpath leading toward the slope. In the soft dirt were clearly recent footprints heading away from the camp. I keyed the mic again. "Tower 12, this is John. I found the source of the smoke. It's a campfire, all right?" "Nothing to be concerned about," Billy answered almost immediately. "Roger that, John. Head back home." I paused a moment, curiosity pulling me toward the footpath. "I'll be heading back shortly, Billy. Just want to check something out first." "I wouldn't screw around out there, John," Billy replied, an edge to his voice. "Better head back now so you can beat the storm." His last sentence didn't exactly sound like a suggestion. Something had him rattled. I hesitated before answering. "Acknowledged," I said, knowing full well I was going to check out the path before heading back. Still, I didn't feel like arguing with my supervisor over something so small. Just a quick walk up that path, then I'd be on my way. This path was even less established than the one I'd been on earlier, but I could clearly see the campers' imprints in the dirt as I went. Before long, I emerged into a small clearing, eyes widening with yet another unexpected discovery. The rough-hewn timber that framed the entryway was set into the near vertical slope of the hillside before me. It created a dark tunnel entrance that had clearly been sealed off with a heavy iron gate many years ago, likely by the Park Service to keep inquisitive hikers from falling to their deaths in an old, abandoned mine shaft. So it had been a mining camp, not a logging one. I didn't know there were any mines near here. Hell, I wasn't even sure what they could have been mining for. Coal? Maybe gold? Did they even have gold mines in Tennessee? Who knows? Certainly not me. Clearly, regardless, now that gate stood wide on its hinges, the remains of a rusted chain and antique padlock lying in the dirt nearby. Hell, I couldn't just turn around and leave. One of these dumbass campers had decided it'd be fun to explore a closed and restricted mine entrance. This is Tower 12. This is John D. Reed. Billy probably wouldn't be happy that I'd continued my exploration after he told me to head back, but there was nothing to do about it now. I wasn't equipped or trained for any sort of cave exploration or rescue. The Rangers had very specialized teams for that sort of thing. But I could at least poke my head inside and see if there were any campers, or hear them, confirm if they went inside. No answer from the radio. I tried again, with the same results. I tried a different approach. Tower 15, this is John from Tower 12. Do you copy? I said into the radio. I figured I might be able to at least get Nathan's attention if I was out of range of Billy. Tower 12. There was a burst of static that sounded like it might have contained the hint of a human voice, but it was too distorted and distant to make anything out. There was only a moment of indecision before I made up my mind. I knew it was reckless going into the mine, especially when my supervisor believed I was currently on my way back to the tower. But I had this nagging intuition that something might be wrong with the whole situation. Maybe someone was hurt and needed help. I couldn't just leave them there, knowing that I might be their only chance of rescue. In retrospect, I should have turned back and called it in to the ranger station. They could have mobilized the search and rescue teams that specialized in cave rescues. I should have. But I didn't. I pulled my powerful LED flashlight from my pack, turned it on, and headed into the pitch-black darkness of the mine entrance. The walls and floor had been smoothly carved many years ago, which made my footing uneventful, and the tunnel itself was mostly a straight shot. Several times during the first few minutes, I turned back to watch the bright square of daylight at the entrance gradually shrink to a pinpoint of light. By the time I'd taken the first dogleg turn of the tunnel, I was in complete darkness. It was a very strange feeling, oppressive almost. At one point, I turned off my flashlight experimentally, but after only a few seconds, I quickly flicked it back on. In that short time, my heart had been pounding in my chest, and some primal fear had begun growing inside me. It took a moment to calm myself. The darkness was absolute. It was almost as if you could feel it pressing in on you. My footsteps seemed much louder than they should have on the dirt floor, and the air was growing cold and damp the further I went. After another 100 feet or so, the smoothly carved tunnel ended abruptly in a wall of rubble. I couldn't tell if it was a cave-in at some point, or if this was simply where the miners stopped digging and hadn't bothered to remove the debris. But either way, it certainly appeared to be the end of the line. And then I saw it. I almost missed it because of the way the light and shadows played over the head-sized rocks strewn before me. But when I looked closer, I realized I was looking at a ragged hole in the wall. It was only 5 feet across or so, and definitely didn't look like the deliberate formation of the tunnel I was standing in now. It almost looked like the miners had broken into a natural void of some sort. Interesting. But there was no way in hell I was going in there. I was definitely not trained or outfitted for any sort of spelunking trip, and it didn't seem the sort of thing suited to the learn-as-you-go method. Just as I was turning back to make my way out of the mine, I heard the distant sound of voices echoing from the opening in the stone wall. The sound was faint, and may have just been my imagination, but I didn't think so. "Hello?" I called, pressing my face into the black abyss of the hole. "Can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you." Nothing. The air from beyond the breach was cold and smelled stale. Old. Wrong. It felt as if I didn't belong here. None of us did. There was a long moment of unbroken silence, and then I heard a voice again. Closer this time. "Did you hear that?" it said, presumably to a companion. It sounded like a young woman, nervous, uncertain. "Hello? Someone there?" That settled it for me. I carefully crawled through the opening into the space beyond. Shining my light around, I found myself in a small natural chamber, maybe 30 feet across, with an uneven ceiling of jagged rock that barely cleared my head. The first thing that caught my attention was the cracked lantern lying on the ground. It looked old, very old, maybe 100 years or more. A thick layer of grime and age covered its soot-blackened surface, and the glass was thick and uneven. Beside the askew lantern was a small leather-bound book, partially buried in the dirt and dust, with a moldering leather strap securing it closed. It looked like a journal. And without a thought, I tucked it into my backpack. Raising my light back up, scanning around the room, "Hello?" I called again. I didn't hear the voices anymore, but the narrow beam of my flashlight illuminated another tunnel in the far corner of this room, mired in darkness. "Can you hear me?" Once again, I got that feeling that something wasn't right. Then the voice came again. Closer this time. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" she asked, her voice trembling with apprehension. I hesitated, frowning. Something didn't seem right about the voice, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Before I could summon my words to respond, another voice called out. This time, it was clear. The voice of a young man. "We can hear you moving around in there. Please help us. We're lost, and our friend is hurt." "Hear me moving around in there?" I was shouting to them. I sure as hell wasn't trying to hide. Could they not hear me for some reason? I stepped forward to the secondary tunnel and raised my voice again. "I'm with the Forest Service." It was then, when I reached out to steady myself against the wall of the tunnel entrance, that my hand met something wet, and I recoiled in disgust, thinking I had just grabbed a handful of some subterranean slime. When I shone my light on it, however, it became very clear the reality was far worse. Blood. I stepped back, trying to keep the panic that was fighting to take control of my rationality at bay. I needed to keep a level head, for now. Panning my light around, I saw an astonishing amount of blood painting the wall and floor in front of me. Somebody had definitely been hurt, and badly. With blood loss like this, I wasn't sure I'd be able to stabilize them long enough to get rescue in here. What the hell happened here? And why did the hikers continue into the cave after one of them was injured this badly? Unless they lost their light and got turned around, there was no way for them to get lost. There hadn't been any branches to this tunnel since I first entered. All they had to do was turn around and walk until they saw daylight. The man's voice called again, colored with the unmistakable tinge of fear. "What the hell is that? Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." He seemed to be getting closer. At least if I could guide them to my voice, maybe I could get them out of here. Get to higher ground. Radio for rescue evac. They had a helicopter permanently stationed at the main ranger station. It could be here in 20 minutes if I was able to reach them. The woman's voice came again, and this time I froze. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" All at once, it hit me. The indescribable unease I had been mostly successful in repressing now fought back with renewed vigor. I realized in that moment what I had missed previously. The woman had repeated herself, twice now. No change in her inflection, no variation in emotion or urgency. It was exactly the same, down to the syllable. It was like I was listening to a recording. "Did you hear that? Hello? Is someone in here?" repeated the male voice, now even closer. "Hurry up, Becky. Take my hand." Below the words, I could hear the stealthy sliding of something over rocks. It seemed like it wasn't too far beyond the tunnel entrance now, but I wasn't going to wait for it to emerge from the darkness. I didn't think that what I'd see emerge from the darkness would be a couple of college kids who'd had a rough time of it during a weekend camping trip. Allowing my panic to run free, I turned and threw myself through the cave breach and landed roughly on the flat stone floor of the mine shaft. Beyond skinning my hands to hell and banging my knee on a rock, scrambling my feet with a hiss of pain, I ran as fast as I could, not realizing until I finally burst into the waning light of the late afternoon that I had lost my rifle somewhere in that cave. It was darker than it was when I first entered the mine. and a quick glance to the sky showed the angry black thunderheads that had moved in, as promised, much faster than I had expected. I quickly swung the iron gate closed on screeching hinges and looped the chain between the bars as tightly as I could, securing it rather lamely with the hasp of a broken padlock. I stood there for a long moment, bent over with my hands on my knees, trying to catch my breath outside the mine entrance when I felt the first drops of the coming storm on the back of my neck. I straightened and looked through the bars of the gate into the ominous darkness beyond, realizing how ridiculous my barricade really was. It wouldn't do much good if something tried to get out, but at least it made me feel a little bit better. Until I heard the voice echoing from the mine shaft. Peh, getting closer. It was unmistakable. Uncanny. Hello, can you hear me? I'm with the Park Service. I'm here to help you. By the time dawn arrived the next morning, I had climbed down from my temporary shelter in the low boughs of the red cedar and tried to work out all the painful kinks from my stiff shoulders and neck. The night had not been kind to me, but I was alive, which is more than my fiercest mind expected after yesterday. The night had been harrowing. There was no better word to describe it. The rain hissed among the trees and stung exposed skin angrily, driven by the banshee wail of the wind rushing through the forest, accentuated by the chaotic flashing of lightning and the heart-stopping crack of thunder. Because of this relentless chaos, it's difficult to say with any certainty. But throughout the night, I thought I heard something large trying to move stealthily in the forest near my shelter. I say, trying, because it felt like whatever stalked through the underbrush was more at home in the unnatural, Stygian gloom of a cave than under the watchful eyes of nature. Of course, it could just as easily have been my imagination. In the first dim light of dawn, as it started to illuminate the sodden and dripping forest, I spent the better part of 20 minutes straining my eyes with every ounce of concentration as I scanned the gray woodlands around me. I was only 10 feet or so above the ground, but there was no way I was going to step foot from my hide until I was absolutely certain that I was alone. Once I was satisfied, I was alone for the moment. I climbed down to the muddy ground. I tried the radio several times through the night and into the morning, but wasn't able to get even a burst of static that might indicate someone trying to respond. A combination of the storm and interference from the trees worked against me. My first thought was to get back to my Jeep as quickly as possible and run every drop of gas out of its tank, trying to get as far away from this place as I could. When I checked the GPS to see how close I was to its marked position, however, I found the unit unresponsive, with a disastrous crack across the screen that seemed to mock my dismay, probably caused by my less than graceful scramble from that damned cave. A rifle, no radio, no GPS. Perfect. I still had a compass and the rising sun to guide me, though, and that was something. I was only a couple miles from my tower, which should have been somewhere due south of where I stood. I knew that once I got close, I should be able to either find the service road or the tower itself, so there wasn't much danger of getting myself lost, at least. It was a small comfort, but one I gladly took. I moved through the trees and undergrowth with more speed and recklessness than I probably should have. An ankle broken by an errant misstep would have been bad news. Still, even though I hadn't heard or seen anything of my late-night visitor, I couldn't help but feel I was being watched. Do you know that creeping sense of dread you feel when you've just turned off the lights in the basement and now have to climb the stairs back to the light of the doorway? Or when you're making your way from your car in a dark and lonely parking lot? The feeling that something is there, something much more suited to the dark than you are? It's that same feeling that pushed my footsteps almost to a jog as I traversed the uneven ground and storm-felled trees that tried to hinder my passage. For the next hour, I moved at this pace, aware of every rasping lungful of breath, knowing that I should pause and rest for a few minutes, as pushing myself to fatigue would only increase my chances of falling or hurting myself. I imagined myself lying in blinding pain next to an unseen chuck hole, clutching at a broken leg and watching as the sunlight began to dim with the onset of dusk, waiting for whatever hunted my trail to find me. What would happen? Would I even have time to look on its visage before it struck? Did those campers in the cave? A misstep and a stumble that nearly made this nightmare a self-fulfilled prophecy jarred me back to the present. Against all instinct, I forced my pace to slow, first to a trot, then to a walk, and then reluctantly, I stopped completely, trying to catch my breath while I scanned the dense woodland around me. Nothing. No. Not nothing. As my heart began to slow and my breathing returned to a more manageable cadence, I turned my gaze back in the direction I had been headed, and an unconscious smile found its way to my lips. The sun had risen high in the morning sky during my flight, and now I caught a flash of its reflection on the windows of my tower, not 200 yards directly ahead of me. I laughed aloud with relief, fully aware that this fear-tinted eruption was closer to the manic cackle of lunacy than anything else. I didn't care, though. My feet started forward on their own, quickly reaching a brisk pace. A few minutes later, I burst out of the trees into the maintained clearing surrounding my tower, feeling the full sunlight on my face for the first time since yesterday. Had it only been a day? It seemed like longer. I was so filled with relief that I didn't even register the fact that the forestry department Jeep sat parked near my fenced-in tower until I started entering the combination into the gate lock. The faded white 12 emblazoned on the corner of the windshield told me that it was Billy's Jeep, which wasn't much of a surprise. I realized after a moment, after not hearing back from him, that I was more surprised I hadn't returned to find an entire search and rescue team making preparations to search for their lost puppy. I punched the 4-digit code into the mechanical combination lock on the gate and stepped through, making sure to close and lock it behind me. I stood there for a moment, staring through the tall chain-link fence at the dense tree line, wondering if something waited just out of sight in the shadows, staring back at me with hungry anticipation. I shook off the sudden chill as best as I could and made my way quickly to the staircase, taking the steps 2 at a time. Billy was going to be pissed at me, I was sure, but that thought was a fleeting one that didn't take purchase. His displeasure was the least of my concerns right now. When I reached the top, I threw open the trapdoor and suddenly found myself looking down the muzzle of a very large rifle. Even in that brief moment of abrupt shock, I could register how the barrel trembled in the hands of its agitated master, and I wondered how close I came to having my life ended in a brief flash of light. The moment only lasted a second or two, and then Billy hastily swung the rifle away in a safe direction. "Damn it, John," he exclaimed, his tone an incongruous mixture of relief and fear. "I almost shot you." I stepped fully through the trap door and let it close behind me. "Jesus, Billy," I breathed, leaning back against the railing. I suddenly felt weary and realized it was likely the adrenaline now rushing through my system that had kept me moving at such a hurried pace throughout the morning. "Where the hell have you been?" he demanded, stepping back inside my shack and taking a chair at the small table in the center of the room. I noted with mild interest that he kept the rifle leaning against the table beside him instead of stowing it in the rack over the door, but decided not to comment on it. Billy Johnson was in his middle years, maybe 45 or so, with a bit of a gut and grayish-brown hair, trimmed clothes. He wore an impressive mustache that reminded me of something an Old West gunslinger might sport. He was dressed in typical attire, khaki Forest Service shirt and brown cargo pants. In addition to the rifle, I had had the unfortunate opportunity to closely examine a moment earlier. I noticed that he wore his .500 Magnum in a holster at his side. That wasn't too unusual. When in the bush, bears and mountain lions can sneak up on you unawares. Having a hand cannon within easy reach goes a long way toward taking the fight out of them if necessary. It was a little unusual for a drive over to another tower, I suppose, but not exceptionally so, given the circumstances. I took the opposite chair, dropping my pack to the floor next to me. I realized my legs were still shaking anxiously and placed my hands on my knees to try to calm them. He was trying to deflect, but he was horrendously bad at it. He knew something. I was sure of it. "You know where I've been," I replied, gambling on instinct. I watched his face closely for a reaction and wasn't disappointed when he winced and turned his focus out the window and over the forest to the north. "I told you to abort and head back to your tower," he stated brusquely. "But you just had to feed that curiosity of yours, didn't you? You're damn lucky to be alive, you know that?" From my chair, I reached under the cupboard to my right and pulled a half-empty bottle of Jameson and a couple of mostly clean glasses. Billy turned his head and raised an inquisitive eyebrow. Alcohol was a no-no up here, but when I poured and handed him one of the glasses, he accepted it without a word. I took a pull from the other. "It's my own damn fault, I suppose," he continued, turning back fully to me. "It's been so long since anyone's even thought of Camp LeClaire that it didn't even click for me when you told me where you saw the campfire." I took another drink and then poured a bit more of the whiskey. "Camp LeClaire," I repeated. "That old mining camp?" "Logging camp, actually," he corrected me. "The mine was there long before the East Atlantic Logging Company set up out there. Nobody knows who dug it. Hell, nobody even knows when it was dug, a long time before the 19th century at least. Camp LeClaire was established in 1872, and the mine was old even before that." He looked at me in earnest for the first time since I'd returned and frowned. "You look like hell, John. Got caught in the storm, I'm guessing." "Hell of a storm." I only raised my eyebrows as if to say, "What an understatement." Billy nodded knowingly and took another swallow. "Did you find the campers at least?" I shook my head and turned to look out the window to the north, where I could almost envision the black void of that mine entrance staring back at me. "No," I said softly. "I tracked them to the mine but lost them in the cave." I jumped when Billy's glass hit the floor, and he was out of his chair before I even realized it. Billy hadn't moved from his seat, but now both hands were splayed on the table before him as if to steady himself. His pale blue eyes were wide and fixed on me. "You went into the cave?" he said, a sudden and horrifying realization dawning on him. It was then I realized my mistake. He hadn't known. He thought I had just discovered the camp and the mine, and then got caught in the storm overnight. A close call, but nothing that couldn't be undone. "Yeah," I replied, nodding slowly, deliberately. "Yeah, I went into that cave looking for the campers. The gate had been cracked open already. I'm not sure by whom or when." I leaned forward in my chair and stared hard at him. "Billy, there's something in there. I think it got those campers. I think it followed me out." Billy Johnson's face had gone white then, and I thought for a moment he might pass out. He scooped his glass up from the floor with numb fingers and poured himself another splash of whiskey, downing it in one gulp. When he spoke again, it sounded far away and distant. "Utami," he muttered. "That's what the Chickasaw called it, and they were here long before we ever were. Blur is what the white man called it, among other names, Kuatami." He nodded. "False brother, lying man, something like that. Hell, I don't know. What do I look like, a translator?" "It means bad," he continued. "No matter what language you speak, it means something's out there that isn't supposed to be, something that was locked away a long time ago and forgotten." It was then that he stood and grabbed his rifle, as if suddenly remembering something. "I need to get back to my tower and make a call now." I gestured to the radio base station sitting patiently on the table near the door. "Why not use mine?" Billy shook his head. "Sorry, John. It doesn't work that way. Special phone, special number. I just hope I'm not too late." I started to stand. "I'll go with you," I said. He pointed a stern finger at me and narrowed his eyes. "No, you stay here, strap on your handgun, and make sure it's loaded." His voice was calm, almost cold, and didn't leave much room for debate. Still, I had no desire to stay alone with whatever this angler thing was roaming around out here. "Billy, I can go with you. I can help." I started to argue, but it was quickly cut off when he took a menacing step toward me. and I realized quickly how much I'd underestimated him because of his normally easy manner. "You will stay in your goddamn tower, and you will follow orders," he roared. I took an unconscious step back and reclaimed my seat, only managing a shaking nod in agreement. He took a trembling breath, pointed at the radio, and said in a slightly less terrifying tone, "And keep that thing on. As soon as I'm back at my tower, I'll radio you with updates." A moment later, he was gone, and the trapdoor slammed shut behind him. I stood and retrieved the Pelican case from under my cot. Inside was the same model of .500 Magnum revolver that Billy had been wearing, heavy and cold in my hands. I loaded it and belted it on the leather holster, feeling the reassuring weight tugging at my waist. "John?" I heard Billy call from below. I went outside to the walkway, leaning over the railing. He was standing beside his Jeep, 50 feet below, shielding his eyes from the bright sunlight as he looked up at me. "Make sure to keep everything locked. I'll come back for you," he shouted. I raised a hand to him and slid the latch shut on the trapdoor with my toe. I turned back into my shack as I heard Billy's Jeep fire up, and a moment later, it drove off down the rough service road toward his tower. I glanced back to the north, to the place where I had first seen the campfire smoke rising the day before, and suppressed a shudder. I was alone again, safe in my tower and armed, but alone. Abruptly, like an unexpected wave of nausea, the feeling that I was being watched washed over me with a chill, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I looked back over my shoulder to where Billy had been only a minute before, but saw only the rough service road and dense, impenetrable tree line beyond. That's probably just my imagination, but the feeling didn't diminish, and with every passing breath, I was more and more certain that there was something nearby, just out of sight, standing stone still in the gray-green foliage, waiting. I stood there a long moment, eyes straining for any hint of movement or alien shape among the shadows. But if there was, my human eyes weren't sharp enough to pick it out. I stepped back through the open doorway of my shack and dropped down into the chair again, my eyes catching the bottle of whiskey before me. I was tempted to pour another drink to help settle my nerves, but I could already feel the tickle of a buzz at the edges of my mind from what I'd already drunk, and quickly decided that was the last thing I needed for my reflexes and awareness to be dulled right now. I'd made more than one poor decision in the last 24 hours, and I didn't think adding another to the pile was such a great idea. Grabbing the bottle, I screwed the cap back on and reached to return it to the sparse cover to my right. As I did so, my boot caught my pack, knocking it over. Without a thought, I reached down to move it out of the way, and then remembered the old weather journal tucked inside the front pocket, the one I'd found in the cave. I reached into the unzipped front pocket. For a frustratingly alarming moment, my searching hand couldn't feel anything in the compartment, and I feared that I'd lost it in my chaotic escape. But then my fingers brushed the familiar shape, and I withdrew it, setting it in front of me on the table. I could see the book much more clearly now in the daylight. It wasn't overly large. A little larger than my hand, and maybe the thickness of my thumb. There were no markings on the front except for a simple, grimy brass loop that secured the leather strap holding it closed. I wasn't sure I wanted to see what was inside, but I needed some answers. Anything. A stray sound from the trees below rose to my ears, and I froze, listening intently for more, but none came. The forest around me was silent again, and I turned my attention back to the journal, pulling the strap free from the cover and turning to the front page. "From the pocket of Andrew Robinson," it said. The writing was neat and compact and distinctly male. The ink was a rich black, scrawled upon brittle yellow pages, and though faded with the years, was still mostly legible. I turned to the next page, where the entries began. I felt as though I had dropped into his account midway, as though this was just the latest in a series of journals that Andrew Robinson had been keeping. 23rd July, 1891. After nearly a week of hard overland trekking, we reached the abandoned camp late this afternoon, exactly where the old trapper said we would. Sequoia Arpani, tracker, has once again astonished me with his overland navigation skills. I must admit I was skeptical at the Yar in the old tavern, spun the crowded confines of the common house in Dun Creek, especially after I smelled the liquor on his breath. But the professor never gathered a moment. The man's instincts for reading human character are absolutely singular. The camp looks to have been abandoned, and I have to admit a certain unease as we inspected the rough cabins. There isn't a soul to be found, and it looks years abandoned, yet everything stands as if awaiting the loggers' return at any moment. Strange. 24th July 1891. Our small troop, both intrepid adventurers, made camp in the center of LeClaire last night. Those cabins likely would have been more comfortable, but I doubt any of us would have felt at ease intruding upon them. Richards laughed it off when someone mentioned how peculiar it was that the loggers had departed in such a hurry that they abandoned their personal possessions. But I could see in his eyes that he felt it odd as well. Sequoia, our ever-courageous and solid guide, seemed ill at ease and unusually withdrawn, refusing all conversation and only responding in queries with quiet grunts. Something of concern hides behind his eyes, though, and I wonder what it is. Only the professor seems unmoved by the unusually still atmosphere of this place, and his typical infectious positivity keeps working at our unease, keeping it from expanding beyond its current state. Today, we spent much of the day exploring the area surrounding Camp LeClaire, and the sunlight was nearly spent when Dobson burst back into camp with news of his discovery. We all of us raced at a moment's notice behind him as he led us along an ill-used and nearly invisible footpath that led ever ascending upon the side of the northern rocky slope. When the path terminated, we were deposited before a truly curious sight, a barricaded tunnel entrance that had been bored into the rock face by some unknown hands. I suspect some sort of exploration tunnel or added dug-in search of precious ores, especially given the nation's more recent history with gold fever. The wooden barrier that had been roughly assembled from a hodgepodge of heavy timber beams was curious, and several of our group commented on it. But the professor dismissed the triviality, so the matter was dropped. It is far too late in the day to proceed any further, but we plan to penetrate the barricade and enter the tunnel in the morning. The excitement among the men is palpable. 25th July 1891. Sequoia is gone. He took his supplies and his prized Winchester rifle and fled sometime during the night like a phantom. This is a shocking blow to all of us, foreign to the professor, with whom the Pawnee Tracker had partnered for a number of years across much of the eastern states. We have no explanation for his sudden desertion, and it sits unwell with the entirety of the group. The overall mood has darkened, I fear. Still, we must push onward. 25th July 1891 addendum. It took more than 2 hours of hard labor, but we were finally able to gain entrance to the mine shortly before noon today. Richards managed to get his boot caught between two heavy timbers as he stumbled forward, straining his ankle with a terrible cry. We feared it broken, but Dr. Franklin assured us that his bones seemed intact. Regardless, Richards was taken back to the camp, where he will convalesce while the rest of us make our entry. His part in our exploration has come to an end for now. We made our way in a single file through the added tunnel for some way before reaching its carved end. The light from our oil lanterns providing regrettably inadequate illumination over the rocky surroundings. When we reached the terminus of the mine tunnel, our hearts sank for a moment before the professor gave an exclamation of discovery and suddenly disappeared through a nearly hidden rift in the wall, surrounded by jagged rocks. We eagerly followed him through, careful of our footing as we went, and found ourselves in what I can only assume to be an accidental breach by the miners into a natural cave system. The air was chill and unmoving, but our excitement over this discovery laid any concerns or discomfort this may have caused. The professor directed us to set up a secondary camp in this new chamber, which we'll use as a staging point for further exploration. So, We spent the rest of the day bringing supplies for our main camp and constructing a smaller version in this moderately sized chamber. By the time we completed this endeavor, the efforts of the day precluded the start of the exploration until the group has had the opportunity to rest and replenish their energy. I feel I will sleep well tonight despite the anxious excitement buzzing around my mind. 26th July, 1891. Another shock. When we woke this morning, O'Connor is gone. The Irishman, who has ever been reliable and constant as the North Star, was assigned first watch last night. There is no trace of him, and no indication that he took any provisions or even his personal rucksack with him. I fear his natural inquisitiveness may have gotten the best of him and led him to explore the deeper caverns beyond our ad hoc base camp, for his lantern is the sole item that has gone missing with his person. The professor immediately rallied the rest of our small group, 7 in all now, and mounted a search for our lost companion. I tried to caution him against rushing into action, but he was not to be deterred. To my dismay, I was the sole man ordered to remain here at camp, whilst my companions took up their supplies and launched deeper into the cave system in the event young O'Connor returned in their absence. I was understandably disappointed, but grasped the logic of it well enough. I would loathe to think of O'Connor returning only to find us all gone, and then losing himself again, trying to find us. I shall endeavor to rest a bit. With luck, my companions will return before long with our lost compatriot. 27th July, 1891. I am at my wit's end, and I'm unsure how to proceed. It has been more than a day since the professor led the rest of the men in search of poor O'Connor, and I have felt their absence as keenly as I am aware of my own solitude in this cave. I've seen nothing of our missing companion or the party that delved deeper into the system yesterday morning, and I know their lanterns did not have sufficient fuel to carry them for this long without other means of illumination to guide their return. I fear they are hopelessly lost. I myself had to return to Leclerc for more lantern oil for my waning light. I must admit, with no little embarrassment and some reluctance, to my return to this dark place, which no longer carries any of its former adventurous excitement or fascination. It is now nothing more than a doorway into the deep places below the earth, where men were never intended to tread. But the growing apprehension is not the worst of it. The sounds, by heaven's grace, the sounds. I first became aware of them last night as I did my lantern and tried to set myself to sleep. At first, it was only an indistinct and muted echo, which may have been interpreted as nothing more than the distant whistle of wind or other natural sound distorted by the unique acoustics of this place. Then I heard the distinct tonal qualities that could only be a man's voice. I instantly rose and took my lantern, raising the flame and rushing to the entrance of the cave that swallowed my companions. There I stood, listening with such keen focus that I felt beads of sweat upon my brow. I would swear upon a holy book that it was the distant call of the professor himself, and I eagerly called back with as much fervor as I could summon, hoping desperately to guide them back to me. However, the instant I called out, the voices vanished, and I was met only with the suffocating silence of an open tomb. There I stood, straight as a sentinel, praying for a response from my friends. After several minutes of absolute silence, my thoughts began turning to dark things. I became painfully aware that anything beyond the weak cast of my lantern would be utterly invisible to me. But I, on the other hand, would be lighted as a beacon to it. I pushed these thoughts from my mind as forcefully as I could, inwardly chastising myself for seeing ghouls where none existed. I was about to call out again to my lost companions when I heard it. The voice came again, echoing from the claustrophobic abyss that lay before me, mired in the blackest darkness one could imagine. It was still some distance away, I estimated, but I was certain it seemed closer now. When the third time I heard it, I was just barely able to make out the words, but it was enough to be sure. My own words echoed back at me from the depths of that damned cave, and in my own voice, I staggered and nearly dropped the lantern. At that moment, could the legends be true? The professor always seemed to believe them, though I must admit I attributed his faith to the unwavering certainty he held in those things lost to antiquity. He'd always maintained that a legend, especially one whispered by so many indigenous people without mutual contact, must have some root in truth. But that line of reasoning is antithetical to modern civility, and I must reject it and focus on the more probable explanation that my already stressed nerves were turning my fears against me. The voices must be those of my companions, lost in the dark, but near enough to hear their calls. They must be. I'm not certain what lies next, but I know that I cannot abandon my companions, my friends, to wander the darkness until they fall from exhaustion or dehydration. Not while I might yet help them. I will leave this written account at the entrance to the cave. This lantern is nearly spent, but I have another with a full vessel that'll take its stead. If I do not return, at least someone may know of our passing here. May God be with us all. I closed the journal with a trembling hand, momentarily lost in what I just read. How is it possible? The journal was more than 130 years old. No animal alive then could be what pursued me now. What if it's not an animal? The sudden burst of static from Billy's call that simultaneously erupted from my radio base station and the portable handset clipped to my shoulder made me jump and drop the journal to the floor, heart pounding. I cursed under my breath and keyed the microphone. "Go for Tower 9, I answered, my voice tight as I spoke. My eyes drifted out across the sky to the east, where darkening thunderheads had been unknowingly gathering and marching slowly in my direction. I shook my head. Icing on the cake, I thought. "John, what's your position?" asked Billy, the self-assured authority that filled his tone now strangely absent, replaced with something else, fear. I frowned a moment at the question before answering. "What do you think, Billy? I'm in my tower, just like you told me." A strange pause before he spoke again. "John, this isn't some sort of joke, right? You're not outside my tower?" I was growing more agitated by the moment. What sort of question was that? I had no Jeep. There was no way I could have made it to his tower in such a short amount of time, even if I'd wanted to. "No, Billy," I answered with more force than I intended. "I'm not outside your tower." I stopped mid-sentence, a horrified realization sweeping over me. In that moment, I tried to speak, but my mouth had gone dry. "Billy," it was all I could muster. The radio was silent as my eyes slowly drifted to the west, where I could just make out the small, lonely shape of Tower 12. Barely visible over the darkening blanket of green, was that a gunshot? Another night, another goddamn night stuck in this window-lined prism. At least I have a good view, so I guess that's something. The storm raged all night again last night, and only let up just before dawn. At one point, the winds were gusting hard enough to rock the tower, which was a bit disconcerting to say the least. As I stand out on the wet catwalk around my shack, I see that the clouds haven't let us go just yet, and look every bit as pissed off as they did yesterday afternoon. It seems like the last dry season has come to an end, which is good since I've been slacking a bit on my fire-watching duties over the last couple of days. Gallows humor, right? Due to that, or I'm sitting in the corner in a fetal position crying. I've been told by my ex-fiancée that I'm not an attractive crier. I haven't heard Pete from Billy since his last terrifying broadcast to me yesterday. I tried to reach him several times since then, but no dice. I've also tried reaching Nathan and the ranger station, but all I get is static, even from my base radio set. When I first started here, I remember Billy telling me during my brief orientation that the radio should be able to reach out 50 miles or more, so I'm not sure what's going on with them. Update. I just took a quick look at the base station and found that the cable leading up to the antenna on the roof of the shack is now just a dangly thing swaying in the breeze. The storm must have decided it needed the antenna more than I did because it's gone. I can see where the screws were torn out of the wooden mast, and before you say anything about whatever this thing is that's been stalking around and deciding to sabotage my radio, I should probably tell you that the wooden antenna mast looks like it's been around for a long time. The wood was probably dry rotted to begin with. And now that it's soaked, it's crumbled away into little wet brown bits as soon as I probed it with my fingers. Speaking of whatever this Kwatami or angler thing is, and I'm just going to call it a mimic, I think I haven't heard anything weird since yesterday. I'm assuming it's still over there somewhere, but I don't think it's nearby. If it's still anywhere around here, it's probably somewhere over near Tower 12, or at least that's what makes the most sense to me anyways. Which brings me to my shiny new lunatic idea, my Jeep. It can't be more than a mile down the northern track, still sitting there in front of that fallen pine. I could probably get to it in less than an hour, even with this wet and muddy ground. It had almost a full tank of gas, and I'm pretty sure I could outrun this mimic thing in it if I could get a straight shot down the service road. I definitely don't relish the idea, mind you. Every instinct is screaming at me to sit my butt right down where I am in this tower, and I know the ranger station will start getting a little antsy when Billy doesn't check in after a few days, but I'm also thinking they may extend it out a day or two in light of the foul weather. Maybe 5 days out in the wilderness, and then I'll have a ranger truck parked outside my tower. The question is, what they'll find when they get here. See, I've been thinking about it. Billy definitely knew more about this thing than I do. Certainly enough to not open the door when he heard it outside, pretending to be a Girl Scout selling cookies. That makes me think that maybe the fence and the trapdoor might not be enough to stop it if it really wants in. As Pants shittingly terrified as the prospect of leaving the tower and making for the Jeep is, sitting here cornered in my window-lined shack, just waiting for it to show up in the middle of the night is worse. At least I have a chance out there. I still have the Magnum. It's been holstered to my belt since yesterday. They don't issue pea shooters for bear protection out here. This thing is the most powerful handgun in mass production. It'll put down anything in North America as long as you can hit it right. Any normal animal, anyways. Who knows what this thing is capable of? Still, it does provide a level of comfort and gives me some confidence that my plan may work. It's on my side for now. I'm going to try to eat a granola bar to put something in my churning stomach and try to build a little energy. I don't think I've eaten anything since yesterday. After that, I'm grabbing my pack and heading out. Wish me luck. I left my tower shortly after 10 a.m., and let me tell you, those were some of the most difficult first steps I've ever taken in my life. Stepping out through the chain link fence into that open space beyond my small compound felt like I was stepping off the roof of a skyscraper. When I closed the gate behind me, I stood there motionless. Must have been 5 minutes, frozen in place with my hand clenching the grip of my revolver that's holstered at my belt. Even with all the stress and anxiety swirling around in my head, I was amazed at how keen my senses seemed in that moment. I felt like I could hear every rustle of leaves and smell every damp patch of moss in the thousands of acres of wilderness surrounding me. In that moment, I felt very small, very insignificant, trivial. When my chest began to ache, I realized that I'd been holding my breath in subconsciously, afraid to make even the smallest sound. I let out a slow breath and forced myself to breathe normally again, scanning the trees. I turned slowly in a circle, eyes searching for anything that seemed out of place, like it didn't belong. But there was nothing there. Everything seemed normal, at least to me. Casting one last look over my shoulder at the refuge of my tower, I started off along the seldom-used service road to the north, careful of my footing on the muddy and uneven ground. I allowed myself to move at a slow jog, fast enough to make good progress, but not so fast that I was announcing my presence to the world. Not so fast that I couldn't hear the forest around me over my own breathing. I stopped a couple of times during my trek to catch my breath and take a drink of water, and thankfully still seemed alone and unpursued for now. I wondered if it was out there somewhere among the dense trees, hiding in the muted gray shadows of the forest. Or perhaps it had returned to my tower in my absence and found it empty, and was even now tracking my flight along this trail. If I paused long enough, Would it suddenly appear, rounding the gentle curve behind me as it caught up to me in order to prefer to move more stealthily among the trees and underbrush, laying in wait alongside the path ahead, ready for my approach? I had to forcibly shake myself of that line of thought. It wasn't doing me any good now. I was committed to my plan. The thought of retracing my steps and returning to my lonely watchtower held just as much terror, because now it's out there, unmanned, unwatched, and abandoned. For all I know, the mimic could be there at this very moment, ransacking my shack. I definitely didn't want to walk in on that little scene. I can promise you that much. I ended up making surprisingly good time on that northern path. It was only about 30 minutes before I saw the dim shape of my Jeep waiting dutifully in the middle of the path ahead. The matte tan paint job and black cloth roof stood out remarkably well against the muted greens and browns of the surrounding forest. Urging my pace to quicken, I covered the last 100 yards before I even realized it and found myself standing at the door, hand on the handle. I paused. A chill ran down my spine, inciting an unbidden shiver. And I realized then how quiet the forest around me was. I wasn't sure how long it had been this way. I felt that something was out of place, and so did the native fauna. On any given day, the trees were alive with the sounds of wildlife. Squirrels and chipmunks chittered, insects buzzed, and 1,000 varieties of birds called and sang from the treetops. Not now, though. Now it was as if they had all left. It felt very alone in that moment. Only not quite alone. Somewhere out there, in that sea of trees, something stalked. Something that didn't belong in the light of day. Something that didn't belong under the watchful eyes of Mother Nature. I was pretty sure she wouldn't have let something like the mimic evolve had it not been hidden in its underground realm. The door of the Jeep was thankfully quiet as I depressed the latch and swung it open. If this had been a horror movie, I'm sure an ear-splitting screech would have erupted from its hinges. But in real life, we tend to take care of these vehicles pretty well. In the best of times, they are the only convenient transportation for 20 miles or more. In times like this, though, it was likely the only thing that would save my sorry ass. I jumped in and pulled the door shut behind me with a dull thunk, subconsciously locking it. I almost laughed when I did that. The entire top of the Jeep was nothing more than canvas and plastic windows. A feisty hamster could probably have penetrated my little haven, and I doubt the mimic would even think twice about it. The Jeep fired up immediately when I turned the key in the ignition, and I threw it in reverse for the most ungraceful 14-point turn you've ever seen on the narrow and muddy service road. Once I got it turned around, I didn't waste any time directing it the way I'd come. The service road was really little more than an uneven and ill-maintained dirt trail, and was only ever used infrequently by the rangers and lookouts. As I'd previously mentioned, it was a rough ride, even for the heavy suspension of my trusty steed, so I had to keep it at a reasonable speed. The very last thing I needed was to snap an axle or bounce myself right off the road and into the trees. Considering the condition of the trail, with the fact that it constantly wound and curved as it progressed, it meant that even my best speed wasn't much faster than I could run on foot. That's okay. Once I got past my tower, the service road was generally better maintained and followed a more or less straight path. I'd be able to build some decent speed there and be out of the wilderness and standing at the ranger station in an hour or so. The abrupt appearance of my tower caused me to feather off the gas as I rounded the last curve from the northern track. I slowed to a crawl and squinted through the now dirty windshield. From here, everything looked exactly like I had left it. The gate still stood closed, and looking up, I could see the trapdoor also appeared shut. Maybe this thing hadn't returned. Hell, maybe this thing wasn't ever going to return. For all I knew, I was headed in the opposite direction. It's not like looking at a GPS on it or anything. It was at that moment that I nearly pissed myself when the radio, still clipped to my belt, squawked, and I heard probably the last thing I had ever expected to hear. "John, are you there?" The signal was pretty clear, but his voice sounded weak, strained. I almost didn't respond. I was frozen in indecision, clouding my mind. I didn't know what I could trust to be true, but I doubted that this mimic had read the radio manual and learned how to operate the handset. I snatched the handset from my shoulder and keyed the mic. "Billy? Holy? Is that you?" He answered me right away, and I thought I could hear relief in his tone, buried under his pained words. "John? Thank God. I was afraid you were gone." My eyes drifted to the trail leading past my tower toward the ranger station, toward safety. Another 5 minutes, and I would have been there. I got to my Jeep, and I was just about to haul ass for the ranger station when I replied, "What's your status?" There was a moment of silence, and I wondered briefly if he hadn't even heard me. But then he answered, "I'm not doing too hot, John. I'm in my tower, but that thing hurt me. I've lost a lot of blood, and I've been drifting in and out. I've patched myself up as best as I could. I stopped the bleeding from my leg." He frowned and closed his eyes for a moment, asking a question I was pretty sure I knew the answer to. "Are you able to get back to your Jeep?" I thought I heard a coughing bark of laughter before he answered. "I don't think so. Pretty banged up, man. What happened?" "Billy, son of a... It got into my tower, managed to get a shot off, but not before it got a jump on me. I took off before it did me in, so I think I hit it. I don't know where it is now, though. My tower is wide open, and it hasn't come back, so maybe it's dead." I doubted that. Things never work out that simply. "Are you stable, Billy? Can you be moved?" Another silence, and then he said, "I know what you're thinking, John. Just turn your Jeep around and haul ass to the ranger station. That's an order." I dropped my forehead to the steering wheel, closing my eyes and cursing. It would have been easier if Billy hadn't radioed me. I know it's selfish. I know I'm an idiot for even thinking it, but I could have been blissfully out of range if he'd only waited for 10 more minutes. Still, I put the throttle down and got the hell out of there. I could still race for the ranger station, have them mobilize a chopper to come back for Billy. But they were at least an hour away. Factor in the spin-up time for the helicopter, and you're talking more like an hour and a half before anyone gets to him. It didn't sound good. Something told me it was unlikely he'd last that amount of time. I could still turn left. I'd likely live. But could I live with myself knowing that I left Billy to die alone in his tower? What if our situations had been reversed? Sure, I might be saying the same words he was saying now, but in my heart, I'd be pleading for that voice on the radio to help me. I couldn't imagine being in his position, lying there, hurt, bleeding out, knowing that his safe haven was wide open and that thing was out there somewhere. Look, I know what you're going to say. I know what you're probably saying already. Don't be a dumbass. This is exactly why everyone dies in a horror movie. I get it, believe me. I get it. But this wasn't a movie. My friend was lying there, dying in his shack. If I could get to him and get him into the Jeep, we could both get out of there, leaving this twisted nightmare behind us. Billy, I'm headed your way. Get ready, because we're going to wrestle you down the stairs and into my Jeep as quickly as we can, I said, cranking the wheel to the right and taking the western trail with more speed than I should have. John, I gave you an order. Get out of here now. Despite the situation, I managed to start a grin as my rig bucked and bounced over the uneven trail. Billy, I'd like to take this opportunity to officially tender my resignation from the fire watch. Now shut your mouth and conserve your strength. I'll be there in 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Trying to be a pretty good guess, and before long, I skidded to a halt outside Tower 12, next to Billy's ride. I opened the door and stepped out into the quiet air, my handgun coming from its holster and held before me like some sort of shield. I took a quick moment to let my eyes roam over the surrounding woodlands for any sign of movement, before quickly jogging around my Jeep and toward the compound's entrance. I passed through an open doorway, taking note of the heavy chain-link gate that was lying twisted 15 feet inside the fence. Another dozen paces, and I was at the base of the stairs, craning my neck to make sure nothing was awaiting me above. I kept the mic on my shoulder and said in a low voice, Billy, I'm outside your tower right now. Heading up. For Christ's sake, don't shoot me. I turned the volume on the speaker down just in time for his response. Damn it, John. I told you to leave. Despite his words, the gratitude and relief were clear in his tone. I started up the stairs, revolver still held at the ready as my other hand ran lightly up the railing. My eyes were drawn to the red-black spots staining the gray paint of the steel steps. I found even more of the viscous liquid on the railing as I continued my ascent. Blood, but not Billy's. God, I hope that thing is lying in the woods, breathing its last breath. He definitely hit it, but I had no way of telling how seriously it was hurt. In a human, red blood indicated an arterial bleed, which was typically a fairly significant injury. With this thing, who knew what black-red meant? I climbed the rest of the stairs around the tower and stopped just below the open trapdoor. Billy? I called cautiously. A pause, then came his reply, shaky and with a wheezing sound I didn't like at all. How do I know it's you? Say something I couldn't have heard you say before. I have always admired and respected you, I answered without hesitation. He said under his breath, Come on up. I took another couple of steps, cautiously poking my head through the trapdoor. Billy was sitting upright, more or less, resting his back against the doorframe of his shack and aiming his own handgun generally in my direction. As soon as he saw my face, he dropped his hand to the side, the stainless steel barrel clanging against the metal walkway. As I stepped fully through the trapdoor, I noticed two things immediately. Firstly, there was a significant amount of that black-red goo splattered around. Secondly, I realized how badly injured Billy was. His face had gone gray with a sickly paleness, and his breaths came in ragged hitches. Blood-soaked bandages wrapped both forearms, and his face was covered in a crimson rag taped haphazardly down. His entire khaki park shirt was painted in a hellish tie-dye of shades of red, but it was his leg that worried me the most. A tourniquet had been tied around his thigh, and he was groaning, but the pants leg was a cherry red below that, glistening in the late morning light. Jesus, Billy, I exclaimed, holstering my gun and rushing to his side. He waved me off, saying, All beside me. I know it looks bad. Save it for later. Let's get out of here before that thing decides to come back for another round. I nodded and stood again, taking a quick glance past him into his shack. A twin of my own tower, normally Billy's looked like a war zone now. His table and desk had both been overturned and smashed, along with his base-set radio on the floor. On the floor nearby was a satellite phone, its antenna and display obviously smashed during the attack. Lifting his arm over my head, I helped him to his feet. He grimaced in pain, but threw his remaining strength in with mine, and we began the precarious descent through the trapdoor. Did you at least get to make your phone call? I asked him as we took the steps carefully and agonizingly slow. He shook his head. Got here just as I was getting ready to. Excusing your voice, telling me that you were from the Park Service and you were here to help. He looked at me with a shaking astonishment. Sounded just like you, John. I looked over the catwalk, railing down at it. He winced again as we stumbled on a step. Almost there, John, he continued. Well, yeah, I've never seen anything like it. I shook my head as we reached the bottom step and moved onto the rain-soaked ground. I grunted with exertion. Save it, Billy. We've got a long ride ahead of us. Plenty of time for that later. He just nodded as I maneuvered him and ran to the passenger side of the Jeep and helped him climb in. Once he was in, I hurried back around to the driver's side door, got in, started the engine, and pulled the door closed behind me. Throwing it into reverse, I felt the wheels break loose as I stepped on the gas with a bit too much enthusiasm. I swung the 4x4 around and put it into drive, pointing it back toward my tower and beyond. Safety. I only had a heartbeat's warning from Billy before I saw it barreling from the underbrush at us. It threw itself, a great mass, crashing into the side of the Jeep, and Billy scrambled to get away from it, damn near climbing over the center console in the process and knocking my hands off the wheel. In a panic, the Jeep swung wildly left, and I stomped down on the brakes to avoid slamming into the trees. One of the front wheels dipped off the road, and the steel bumper crashed through a small cluster of oak saplings, halting us abruptly. The engine stalled, and everything went silent in that moment as we froze. My breath hitched in my lungs, and my eyes widened in shock as I laid eyes upon the abomination for the first time. My first impression was that it was much larger than I had thought, but the nightmare visage before me eclipsed such a pedestrian observation. The thing stood in the middle of the trail, still shaking its head as if trying to recover its senses after the collision with a 2-ton vehicle. It looked vaguely humanoid in a sense, but it walked on 4 limbs, clearly proportioned to such a task. It was hairless, and its mottled pink-gray skin stretched taut over muscles, bones, and odd unidentifiable bulges. The limbs seemed to have joints that bent in all the wrong directions and ended in what had been claws, but instead of the distinctive keratin-composed sharp nails that seemed so familiar in the natural world, these seemed to be extensions of the creature's skeletal structure, protruding painfully through its veiny, translucent hide. The worst of all was the bulbous and disproportionately large head, topped with an oddly gaunt-appearing neck. It was oblong and reminded me of the shape of a feline's skull. Its mouth seemed a jagged tear across its face, with ill-fitting and chaotically positioned teeth that didn't seem to allow the mouth to close properly. I couldn't see any eyes, but where they should have been, instead, there were 2 bulbous and cyst-like organs, seemingly bulging and flattening in a slow rhythm as if bladders were filling with air or liquid. I reeled back in revulsion as it turned its sightless head in our direction, searchingly. Flaps of skin on either side of its malformed snout opened slowly, like some obscene blossom composed of milky gray bat wings, and I had the sense that it was using them to try to somehow locate us. It was then I saw where Billy's shot had struck the creature in the face. One of the snout flaps was nearly completely severed, hanging limply in contrast to its sibling. A gouge furrowed by the bullet's travel creased along the right side of the thing's head, piercing and ravaging the bulbous organ on that side and leaving it a deflated sac. When it turned its head further in our direction, I could see clearly where it had bled significantly from the shot, but I was horrified to see that the wound had already sealed itself, leaving a shiny silver scar to mark the incident. "I knew I hit you, you bastard," Billy whispered, half to himself. The mimic stopped its motion, and we watched as the uninjured bladder on its head expanded like a half-filled party balloon. It dipped its head a bit, and we saw 2 membranous slits in the top of its skull dilate. A moment later, the twisted sound of a human voice assaulted our ears. "I know you're out there." The voice was unmistakably Billy's, but it was distorted and wrong. I thought that the wound from his gunshot probably had something to do with that. The thing raised its head again, turning a bit more in our direction. It took a few experimental steps forward, then paused and lowered its head. This time, we heard what sounded like the painful roar of a beast, almost perfectly replicated, except for that same distortion we had heard previously. "Killed a bear." I held my breath as we watched it again raise its head and take a few more contemplative steps in our direction, slowly swinging its grotesque snout back and forth. I could see how the flaps of skin that were flared open, where its nose should have been twitched minutely back and forth, and I felt like it was using them to listen for us. "Knows we're here somewhere, but he can't see us," whispered Billy, leaning close. "But if it gets close enough, I'm thinking we're done for." I looked over at Billy and realized that there was no way he'd be able to make a run for it in his condition. From the look of the thing growing ever closer to where we cowered in our Jeep, I thought it was likely we didn't have much time before it got close enough to hear our breathing, our heartbeats, or whatever, even inside the 4x4, and when that happened, I knew what would come next. Billy closed his eyes for a moment and turned to me. There was something in his eyes then, sort of acceptance. So he didn't like it one bit. "Get ready with the cannon," he whispered. "Only gonna get one chance at this." "What are you talking about?" I asked. A moment later, I had my answer. Billy took a deep breath and mustered every bit of strength to fling the door open and stagger out of the Jeep. "I'm right here," he shouted, limping weakly across the road from the Jeep. The mimic whipped its head in his direction instantly, but tilted its head to the side, seemingly momentarily puzzled at this unexpected turn of events. Billy held his own magnum in his hand, but it was too weak to raise it towards the beast. Still, he pulled the trigger, and a resounding boom seemed to shake the air. The mimic flinched at the defining sound of the gunshot, the flap of membrane at its snout snapping shut protectively. But its stunned hesitation didn't last very long. In an instant, faster than I would have thought possible, it launched itself on powerful limbs at Billy, knocking him to the ground and tearing at him with teeth and claws. I heard my friend screaming, then a horrible, soul-rending sound that I'll never forget as long as I live. But now was my chance, and I took it. I swung the door open and stepped out of the Jeep, my gun coming free of its holster in the same moment. The creature was preoccupied with what was left of Billy, but as soon as I brought the gun up and thumbed back the hammer, its head swung around at me. It crouched like a compressed spring, preparing to launch, but I was quicker. The report of the gunshot was incredible, and the recoil from the powerful round rocked my wrist back painfully. The beast staggered, and I saw a burst of blood and tissue explode from a wound where its shoulder met its neck. It howled an otherworldly cry, sounding like a bedlam mixture of man and beast. But though the wound seemed terrible, it tried once again to throw itself at me. I was set on my course, though, and took step after step toward the creature, pulling the trigger again and again until the gun ran dry. All I was left with was the clicking of the hammer and a high-pitched ringing in my ears. The acrid smell of gunpowder stung my nose, and by the time I finally stopped, I found myself within only a few feet of the horrific thing. 6 blackened holes stippled the neck and torso of the creature where the bullets had entered, and I knew that the destruction of their exits on the opposite side would be far worse. The mimic lay sprawled across the ruined body of Billy Johnson, its weight crushing whatever had been left of my friend. Black-red blood spread out from beneath the thing's bulk like an oil spill across a smooth floor. I noted with some muted surprise that the creature still twitched and slowly flexed its powerful muscles, and a wheezing sound was quietly emanating from the slits on the top of its skull. I holstered my empty handgun and scanned around the ground for what I knew was there. A moment later, I spotted it. Billy's own magnum, lying half buried in the muck where it had been torn from its grip under the weight of the monster. I snatched it up and shook it clear of most of the mud and grass. Opening the cylinder, I saw that only one unfired round remained. That was enough, though. I approached the horror before me without apprehension or pause, my eyes focused on this thing that had caused so much pain and terror. I thumbed the hammer back and placed the muzzle against the mimic's head, which still convulsed with some small remaining life. I didn't know if it would be able to heal from the wounds I had already inflicted. Logic told me it was unlikely, but the silvery scar I'd seen from Billy's previous encounter caused me to question everything I thought was possible. I felt the tremors from the creature vibrate through the gun as the barrel rested against its skull, right between where its eyes should have been. I tensed my finger on the cold steel of the trigger, and the crack of the gunshot echoed throughout the forest. It was done. But even as I walked back numbly to the Jeep and restarted the engine, I wondered if that was true. I thought back to the journal I'd read, written more than 130 years before, and how it alluded to the tales of this creature going back long before then. As I drove the Jeep along the rough and winding service road, I wondered at the possibility that what we encountered was the only one of its kind. That the same beast had somehow terrorized cultures separated from each other by great time and distance, spawning the legends that the author of the journal and his companions pursued. It didn't seem likely. And now the door was open.